Yeah, I've done a couple
Yeah,
test recordings.
you let me know if I get a little quiet. I'll try to stay close to my microphone. But
Yeah, let me just make sure you're all at the same volume, so there's no like Dan's really loud and Julian's really quiet for some reason, you know?
Yeah, right.
That's where it'd be nice to be able to record each of us on different tracks. But
yeah, I mean, we could all do it, but it's just the pain of getting it, editing it. If we all have separate parts, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, ideally we would all just have our own Audacity recording.
If it's editing that you need done, like I took a couple classes back in
I think there's better software for this.
Yeah, there probably
like
is.
Video call recording.
I mean, like I've got a premium Filmora and it does the job, you know? Like my girlfriend uses it all the time to record her karaoke videos and stuff, and it's pretty decent quality.
No, but the thing is, if you're recording one voice and editing, it's quite easy, but if you have to record like 4 external sources and split them into different tracks as you're recording, it can be
you just gotta sync up the audio at the start, have everyone do the 1 2 3 clap, and then you just sync up that initial clap, and then everyone's on the same timeline. As long as no one has any like audio hiccups, everything should be fine.
Yeah, we can look in if we decide to hopefully this is
I think this is episode 1, man.
Yeah,
we gotta see this as episode 1.
We should definitely we can look into better ways to record it in the future if you have other programs and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll dig.
But for now, I think this will do. And yeah, all right. Everyone's ready to begin.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Rock and roll.
So here we are with our discussion / rant / whatever you want to call it of Cyberpunk, because it's probably going to be called a lot of things in the next who knows how long. All right. So, do you want to jump right into something big, or you want to start with something smaller?
Let's start easy.
All right.
Tiptoe it through the tulips, as they say.
Okay, so here we'll go with something that's shouldn't spark up much debate. We'll start by talking about the graphics, the art design, and we can kind of tie in a bit of level design in that too, if you want. But like the aesthetic of the game, and then the graphical fidelity and all that. Julian, why don't you lead us off?
All right. So there's a lot to unpack there. If we're going to talk about like both art direction, graphics, level design, there's a lot. I think that I would say, just from a graphics standpoint, there's a lot of variety there, because if you're looking at it being played on a base, let's say PS4, compared to playing on a PC with one set of parts versus a PC with maybe more advanced parts, or even playing the PS4 game on a PS5, you're going to have so many different versions of the graphics of that game. So if we look at the worst possible scenario, it's pretty grim. And if you play it on a base Xbox One or on a PS4, you're going to have a pretty poor performance.
Bad time,
yeah. I think it's safe to say that's not the vision of Cyberpunk that anyone, including the devs, had for it. So that's kind of a garbage fire. But I think that when you have it running on a smoother system, whether it's on a stronger PC or on a PS5 or a Xbox Series X, you're going to have it a little bit better. It still won't look as good as I think many people were expecting from some of the initial hype trailers. It doesn't quite meet that level, but I think for me, what helps that is the art direction, which is what the other point here is. I think that visually the structure of the city and a lot of the neon lights and reflections make the sort of unified vision of Night City come alive a little bit. And I think it made different districts sort of have their own identity and feel a little more unique and interesting. Initially, that was probably what hooked me into the game the most, was just that sort of awe I had when entering different areas and seeing, different people, huge skyscrapers with different signs on them, all these ads. It was just it was kind of dense and overwhelming, and I think that might be one of the strongest parts of Cyberpunk for me, is the art direction, just sort of the style they went for and how it works with its different districts, and how the visual identity of each place differs and stands aside. So I love that. Level design, I think I'm going to hold off on that a bit.
Yeah, we can. I threw that in there, but we could save level design when we talk more about missions and gameplay if you want. Mm-hmm. we could.
I could go too long.
Yeah, we'll leave this for graphics and art, and I'll say I actually agree with a lot what you said, especially that what you said about it being what first drew you in. Like I remember it was the night we were watching the Game Awards a bit, and I had Cyberpunk on while watching it too. And every once in a while, I would just look at my screen. I was just looking out at the city, and it really captured my imagination and drew me in.
Oh yeah, there were so many beautiful vantage points that it just flat out stopped whatever you were doing. Like you could be in the middle of a gunfight, and you're just on some building sniping someone, or just doing your umpteenth takedown, and you just stare out, and it's like, going back to what Julian said about it really, being what brought him in, I'd say the same thing. Because otherwise, the mechanics they use and whatnot, if you really break it down, it's a first-person shooter with some RPG elements, but it's just it's that design, it's that concept, it's that art direction that it was brave, and there was really nothing else like it at the time. I just wish it didn't take them so many years to develop it. What it was from that initial release trailer, where if you recall, it was the woman. She was on her knees, and she had the mantis blades out, and it was all done in slow motion. It's the very gorgeous visual, and then I don't know. I feel like it kind of strayed from that, and don't get me wrong, I love the advertisements. It's so very telling how they're everywhere, and it's kind of eerie. It's almost an uncanny look into the future, God, I was getting on somewhere and I forgot where I was leading.
I feel like you got lost somewhere halfway in that thought.
Yeah. Well, I think I know what you're saying. And I don't even think you have to go as far back to that initial, because I mean that initial trailer you're talking about, that was just a cinematic teaser.
I guess more of a proof of concept.
But you could even make the same argument from what they really the initial first look at E3 2018 with the initial gameplay demo. Even if you I went back and watched that after I finished Cyberpunk, and we'll get into a lot of the stuff that's different there because it's more gameplay and systems and stuff. But even just visually, there is a bit of a change, at least with how powerful it looks.
Oh yeah, of course.
And also with some of its design aspects. And I guess since we're on the topic of graphics and art design, we can maybe touch on this: the first-person perspective and the lack of any sort of third person.
Well,
yeah.
Or if you want,
on a purely psychological point of view, the first person forced perspective is nice most of the time because it really reinforces that the idea of transference and immersion. But I think that the graphics that they had, I don't know what kind of machines you guys played on, but I was probably the one playing on the highest end machine, and the graphics were absolutely astounding. But when it got to those cinematics, having that forced first person kind of limited where I could look and what I could look at. And in a lot of ways, it framed scenes in a way that was maybe not optimal. And some of those cinematics could definitely have used the third person perspective. I don't know if they pulled back because animating V for all the spectrum of what V could be was too complicated, or if it's really just a question of crunching for time.
Yeah. Well, I think it was more like an initial design choice that they kind of committed to, and you can understand what they were kind of going for, but I agree. Shortly after I finished Cyberpunk, I went back and started playing The Witcher again, and spoiler alert, I'm going to make a lot of references to The Witcher in this podcast.
Well, yeah.
So forewarning, but and The Witcher is all third person cutscenes and everything, and I don't know, I can't describe exactly why, but I felt so much more immersed in the dialogue in The Witcher than in Cyberpunk.
I actually think there could be a few reasons for that in particular. If you're going to talk about the way you felt immersed and the perspectives, I think that the reason that, at least I could be completely wrong about this, but I think that why Cyberpunk is in first person, aside from it being a shooter, and your aim is a little better when you're in first person, I think that it's partially because Geralt is not really you when you're playing Witcher 3. He is a pre-established character. He's someone who already exists. He has his own personality. You kind of choose what he says, but he's Geralt. V, on the other hand, even though V does have kind of a preset character, I think they were going for your V. V is just sort of like the avatar of you. And you're in first person because you're living vicariously through V in Cyberpunk, whereas Geralt is like it's almost more cinematic, more like a movie.
Yeah.
Geralt is this character.
You're there
in a
to
fantasy
witness
world.
Geralt's story more than to write it.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, but even so, like, just because, I mean, there are plenty of games where you play you basically through a third-person perspective, especially among RPGs. But on top of that, there's that idea of you being yourself as V is something I definitely will get into when we get to the main story, because I have a lot of opinions on V. I'll
Same
tell
here.
you that much. But yeah, I know what you're saying, and I when it first was announced that it was going to be first person, I was all for it, because I mean, I grew up on first person shooters, I had no problem with it, and I bought into the idea of like super immersive conversations, and I understood what they wanted to accomplish. I just don't think they necessarily pulled it off well enough in comparison to what could have been if they went with a more traditional, like, Witcher style conversations. Like the attention to detail in the dialogue scenes in The Witcher is just amazing, and just all the different like facial expressions you can see and the cinematography of it, whereas the dialogue in Cyberpunk is very static. Like, yeah, you can turn your head and look at different people and drink your beer, but you kind of feel stuck in place a lot.
Yeah, it makes a lot of the more cinematic moments feel very static.
Yeah, which I think is the opposite of what they wanted to do with it. I think, if anything, the promise of doing it this way, with the art style, the world, and how overwhelming the city can be, it's like supposed to throw you into it, but at least in the dialogue,
and I mean that forced first-person perspective can be a bit of a double-edged sword too, because if you're playing something like the Corpo beginning, then that first person becomes very powerful when you're in the flying car that's being brought to the club. You get to look out the window and have the glass of champagne, and it makes for that moment to be very powerful, very immersive. But in other times when you're just having conversations with NPCs, it feels like the character is very stuck and very immobile, and it makes things, like you said, feel very static. And that's where sometimes a break in that tone, a shift in perspective could have been helpful for the purpose of storytelling, if anything.
Yeah,
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah, and I think it could have worked perfectly if like you put third person for the dialogue, but still kept the first person for like the gameplay and such.
And it doesn't even have to be all dialogue.
No, just like the more cinematic moments.
Yeah, and I think that was something that they teased, or like at least spoke about early in development, was the inclusion of a more cinematic.
They had plans for third person.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to what I was saying about go back and watch the 2018 demo, because that's there in that demo. There's a cutscene of you and Jackie coming out of the elevator when you're going to save.
That whole
Sarah Dorset.
Yeah,
and I feel like they almost shot themselves in the foot by making it entirely first person, because one of the main selling points to me was, and I feel like to many people as well, was that full ability to just entirely customize your character from the very beginning, where you can choose all these hair things and like all these cybernetics and et cetera, et cetera.
The only purpose of customizing a character in that game is the photo mode.
Basically, it's like they're not using the assets that those assets exist. They've clearly, they're there. Why wouldn't you want to kind of show that off? And like, I understand wanting to have that first person perspective for most things, but yeah, exactly like they said in the early trailers, and just as an option, maybe just the players would like, okay, yeah, there's immersive mode where you're locked to first person and it's everything. Even driving, like, I know you could cycle between the two, but like maybe in this immersive mode, you're just stuck in first person.
Actually,
but still include their third person, Now
that you mention it, what they could have done is what they did in Metal Gear Solid 4, where you get moments in cinematics where you get the option of pressing a button. I think it was one of the triggers.
Yes.
To change a force in perspective, to change the perspective. You would witness the cinematics most of the time in third person, but you could, through the use of a button in very specific moments, you'd have a little prompt, and it would bring you back to a different perspective, whether it be a camera that's in a corner of the room, whether it be Snake's eyes, whether it be anything else. You had that option. You didn't have to take it, but it was there.
So I would agree. I do think that would improve it. I'm almost 100% sure that this has to do with constraints with development at that point.
My God,
yeah, I think so entirely.
Yeah.
They started pitching the game way ahead of it being close to ready.
Yeah.
They just didn't. I think they barely made it by the skin of their teeth to get the game out. So like there's tons of things the game could have used to be improved, but they just did not have the the resources, the time or budget left, I guess, to add those things that could have really like sealed the deal with this game, and especially with the immersion, because I mean that's just that topic alone could be a whole discussion. It's just we could just talk about that all day about how the camera perspectives, or like you were saying in conversations, it feels stiff, and I think that's even because let's say if we look at The Witcher, it's just when a character says something and the camera just sort of looks at Geralt's face, so you're like, okay, it's Geralt's turn to say something, he's thinking. Whereas in Cyberpunk, when you're getting ready to say something, even if it's in a really dramatic moment, you have nothing. It's sort of just you don't see what V's thinking or what he's even there. He's just standing there with a gun in his hand or her hand, and you're just thinking about what to say, and the other character is just sort of waiting, and sometimes will thankfully say like a V, you there, or like
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think we do lose some immersion from that, especially with like dramatic music and other person staring at you. Like it's just missing that sort of awkwardness. Could have been relieved with different camera angles. I completely agree. But like I said, I do think that probably comes down to them just really not having the time to set that shit up as good as it would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they've put mechanisms into place to help these moments of conversation feel a little more organic. Like most of the moments where you have limited time to answer something, like they're meant to pressure V into saying something or say nothing, and take the choice away. But they're meant to make these things feel more organic, but I'm not sure that gets the job done. Or at least not entirely. Putting conversations on a timer just to preserve the organic element of it might not have been enough to preserve what little immersion there was during those conversations.
Yeah, the effort is there. It's just that it's missing some other components that could have helped support it and bring it to life a little more. And maybe in ways that we were used to seeing in The Witcher as an example of that sort of more intense conversations. You can even look at like Mass Effect and how Mass Effect does that.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with The Witcher, so I'm using Mass Effect to lean on mostly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of similarities in that you have like your selection of different dialogue choices. I mean, Mass Effect Fine is maybe a bit more binary with like its good and evil choices and more neutral ones, whereas Witcher Geralt is a little more in the gray area. But at the end of the day, you're still having like two people's heads kind of like shifting back and forth with a list of options for your character to say. And I think that, unfortunately, I do think that Cyberpunk could have benefited from taking a few more pages out of Mass Effect's book, because Shepard also is like a similar style character to V, where you customize him and you choose what he does, but he still has his core identity, like things that only Shepard can say or do, and V has things that only V can say or do. But I think that being able to see Shepard, I mean, the whole game is in third person, but being able to see his face in those conversations, even if you made like the ugliest, stupidest looking Shepard, you're still gonna
get to witness how ugly and stupid you made Shepard.
You get to bask in the glory of your own abominations.
Exactly. So it helps. It helps with the conversation. It helps it feel more organic and a little more intense. I think it adds to the feeling, like the oomph behind those scenes. Even if the technology wasn't even necessarily there to make the facial animation super interesting for Shepard. It makes it, because when you look at a movie or a TV show, when two people are having a conversation, there is a way of displaying that. There is like the reverse shot of this person's face, that person's face, this person's face, that person's face, and you lose that in the first person perspective, which makes it feel maybe a bit more gamey and tied down to the limitations of games rather than
it feels more like a flat situation more than anything else. There's the tension isn't there because exactly like Louis was saying, you're half the time they're waiting for your response, so you're just standing there and nothing's really happening on screen, and like you can't even it doesn't even let you like kind of look around the situation. Once again, kind of shooting themselves in the foot. They design these beautifully intricate like environmental details and such, but half the time when you're in these areas, you're locked staring dead eye into somebody else waiting to choose a response, which ultimately, like a lot of the responses I find in general were kind of canned, and ultimately you know, it's aside from a few distinct choices that they can't exactly bring to head right now, the game largely plays out the same way. I would say I've gone through like 2.5 playthroughs now. And,
all right.
I mean, yeah, it's because honestly, it's not that hard to beat. Like if you're just the second playthrough, I will say it was far less completionist. Like the first one, I went around, I did all the tarot cards and whatnot. The second one was really just to blow through the story as the corpo, and it only took me about like 20 hours, something like that.
But I mean,
Okay.
the same can be said about a lot of open worlds where if you stick to main story, like you can easily shave dozens of hours off the playtime.
Oh, of course. But all that to say, my initial point is that having gone through this game a couple times now, a lot of the choices kind of just, I mean, obviously they lead you down to the same road. And, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You look back in the day and like, look at Knights of the Old Republic 1, where ultimately, no matter what, you will end up on the Starforge. What happens there is a difference in opinion. But I mean, I guess, games kind of have to have some kind of conclusion. I don't know. For all the choice that they claim to give you, I feel like it ultimately boils down to more or less the same option.
Yeah.
Like, aside from the dialogue choices, what did your starting path really mean?
Well,
You know?
so I guess we're going to transition now to main story.
I
I think this is a good point to make
guess
that
so, yeah.
transition. Everyone's good to because
Yeah, that's organic.
You're
Right.
you're jumping
Yeah.
in. So yeah, let's go right into it then. So yeah, I mean, we'll start right at the beginning. Like you're saying, your choices. Well, let's start with the first choice you make, and that's which starting mission you take.
Actually, technically, the first choice you make is gender,
Okay, but
but
the first choice that was supposed to make a difference. All right.
Right. Editor
Yes.
cut that.
Okay. But yeah, no, yeah. Well, the first story choice then. So yeah, I mean,
it's cosmetic, purely a cosmetic choice.
yeah. But I feel the three origins are, well, they're bad.
Well, it's which intro do you want to see? It basically comes
Yeah.
down to that, with it,
Yeah.
aside from the few dialogue
Which
options.
intro
Which
do you
it's-
want to see?
it's like
What
not
do you
even-
want your character to sound like 9 times out of 10 when you get background specific questions or answers that you want to give? I feel like
it's-
the corpo's always going to be the sour guy.
No.
The nomad's always going to have his own flavor of stuff, and same for the urchin. But it's very cosmetic, ultimately irrelevant.
Yeah, I'd say you're even giving it too much credit. I never felt like a corpo playing as a corpo.
Me neither.
Well, I think that might also have to do with how. Okay, if we're going to talk about corpo for just 1 second, which is what the path I took was, I think that the transition between the intro and the main game was like very jarring. Like it's
Yeah.
like I'm a corpo, cool. I was like, oh, this is awesome, and then all of a sudden it's just like it just goes straight from that really cool conflict you're having with. I honestly don't remember any of their names, but like your boss and like the other
And his
woman he
boss.
wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like
He
that
basically
cool.
wants you to kill someone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Set
that
up
was
this huge tension, and then just rob you of everything you have in game
so
start.
fast,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
fast.
like,
It
I
just
thought-
happened so
Yeah,
suddenly.
when I met with him in the office, I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm gonna go do this mission, and then that'll be my origin. It's like, no. You get the mission taken away from you, and that's like the last you hear of it.
Yep.
It never comes up again. Like I think there's a reference to some of the name, like the boss's boss at one point, but that's it. It's over. You get one
You
side
get one
quest
side quest.
from one of the guys who works there who like got fucked over, and like that's it. There's no
They
bearing on
even
anything.
set up, like in the whole corpo beginning, they even set up this whole thing where like you have your little office, you have drugs in your first drawer, you have like
A magazine with Siri on it.
yeah.
Yeah.
They're trying to set up the idea of this character that's like performance above all, you know?
Yeah,
He's good at
like-
what he does, but he sometimes needs his crutches or whatever. And they're trying to frame a character, and then you get to the club hoping to start playing that character they set up, and then they just take it all away and throw you into the game. And it's like, okay, that's interesting choice.
Yeah,
And then
I-
they never return to it, and by the end you're like, well, why did they set all of that up, you know?
100%.
well, they probably intended to make use of it, but then what happened is
I think
everything
you're
got
giving them too
funneled.
much credit.
Well, I'm sure on the drawing board they were like, yeah, we'll have 3 very distinct playthroughs like we advertised, but then they're just like, or we'll just have the Street Kid playthrough. Because I think that's all we got. Because I never felt like a corpo. I felt like a Street Kid the whole time. The way he talks, there should have been a different voice.
I agree with
for
that.
each background.
The word choice was very, very urchin-y.
Yeah, like it's clearly the canon choice, or is Street Kid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how they advertised it, so it's not a surprise. But it's like it's clear they kind of abandoned the real idea of having a corpo and a nomad be distinct.
I just want to draw a parallel there, because you just made me realize there's a very similar thing. Like, you just said that maybe they were planning on having 3 distinct ones, but ended up sticking with only one of the intros characters, like one of the character styles. I think that the same thing kind of happened. I know I'm jumping a bit ahead here, but the same thing may have happened with the ending, because I remember talking to you, Jacob, about the ending, when I was like, I still want to see all the endings. I have a Pan Am ending I want to do. I was under the impression at that point that each of the companions you make had an ending with it. So I did the Pan Am ending, and my mind was blown, because I was like, they have one of these for each of them. I'm like, what's River's ending? What, like, I was like, oh, that's awesome. And I checked how many achievements I had left, and I was like, wait. Like,
that doesn't make any sense.
Wait a second here.
I couldn't believe it. I was in shock. I'm like, really? Just for Pan Am? They're probably like, well, we just have, like, the majority of people playing this game are going to be, I don't know, maybe they're going to be playing as straight guys, so we're going to have Pan Am be the main love interest for most players.
For the nomads, too. Yeah, exactly. It's.
I mean, even me as a corpo, I main romanced Pan Am, but I didn't use her at the end.
Did you have a choice?
You barely.
And what was your other option? It was River?
Gay with River, yeah.
No, I don't think you can be gay with River. I think you can only be gay with.
Carrie.
No,
it can be gay with Carrie.
Yeah.
But it's you say that, but it's strange, because I was doing one of the missions with River, and it was like near the end of the thing where you're sitting out on the balcony.
You're sitting on the water tower.
It gave me the option to kiss him, and like I wasn't brave enough to click it, but it's like,
I think
maybe
he can be gay with River.
He's gonna
maybe he rejects you.
Or he rejects you.
Yeah, I think Carrie's the only actual option you can be. Because I think as a guy, you can be gay or straight with a Carrie and Pan Am, and as a girl,
you can be gay with Judy and straight with River.
Yeah,
that's exactly it.
And
so you get 2 choices each.
On the topic of that scene on the water tower, going back to the corpo discussion, there's like you see all the buildings, and they start talking about the corporate life and stuff. And then V just says, like, I would never go back. I don't miss it, whatever. And I'm like, hey,
that's not my V.
Whoa,
that's not a button option.
My V wanted to go back. Yeah,
yeah. And like, it was just so jarring because like, and this is where you're supposed to be, your own character, right? But there's a moment in like the last DLC of Witcher 3 where you're having a conversation with another character, and he asks you, "Oh, if you could, redo your life, would you be a Witcher?" And you get the option to say one or the other for a pre-designed character, but I don't get to say that my.
It's not like the answer to a question like this matters, so why not? Why not give me the choice to answer it?
Yeah, like I'd love it if it also impacted the story in any way, but like at least give me the option if you're going to present it that way. And I think, I guess the main failing of the life paths is that there's just one. Well, or just like I don't even know what to call it. Like it was like you're saying, it was so jarring when it just ended, for the corpo at least, and it just didn't make sense that suddenly I just became this fucking street with Jackie. Like the whole relationship of the corpo V with Jackie. Like how did that even come about?
Yeah, who's Jackie? To
my god! V? Right? Yeah. It's just some dude.
Yeah, he's just there because he has to be.
They insinuate that they were friends before, but you're never there to see that happen.
Yeah, like to what extent, like was I like I don't know. It was just.
But that's just the first of 2 switcheroos they do, because what I feel went the most wrong about the main story was that we got the Johnny Silverhand DLC as the main story.
Yeah.
The game was never about V.
Nope. 100%.
It was about V role playing as Johnny Silverhand.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about it that way before. I actually think Johnny Silverhand is probably one of my favorite parts of the game overall. To be honest with you.
100%. I absolutely loved his character. If anything, hell, I would have preferred to almost just play the whole game as him.
Yep.
Which is why I mentioned
go a la Witcher style and just make him the main character and let's go.
Well, it's funny you say that because like it is kind of what they did. Like Johnny Silverhand is to Cyberpunk in every way you can think of what Geralt is. Because Johnny Silverhand's like the hero in the lore behind the tabletop game. Like, he's not... Like, the whole thing with Arasaka Tower, Rogue, all those people, just like how Witcher Geralt has all his friends, are all from the source material. The only difference is in The Witcher, you play as Geralt, whereas here it's like you're going to play as the vessel, which is, I think, what V actually stands for.
Yeah.
You're the vessel for Johnny Silverhand. And it's literally like Johnny's story. But they market it as this whole thing where you get to be your own V, but you never do.
No.
The only point where that like dream is intact, you know, that V dies with Jackie.
Yeah.
That V, you know, dies in fucking.
The one thing you can
get shot in the head.
Yeah.
What's his name? What was the guy's name? The Golden Arm.
What can't I remember? I just want to say T-Pain, but it's not that.
Dexter Deshawn.
You mean
Dexter Deshawn.
Yeah.
What a name. Yeah.
You know, and then I feel like after that, it was just, you were just living Johnny's story, and I actually kind of feel like they made the same mistake that Fallout 4 did. But they kind of split up the problem into two different characters in one body, but in the sense that, like, Fallout has always been a game about making what you want entirely, you know, like completely different type of playthrough based off whatever you decide. And that's what Cyberpunk was advertised as, or like V was advertised as. Yeah, but then they betrayed that by putting Johnny in you, just like Fallout betrayed that by giving you your predefined backstory and having a kid and forcing you to love it and all that stuff.
Here's a question. Oh, sorry, Julian.
That's okay. No, I was just going to comment and say that, like, at the very least, Johnny Silverhand was enjoyable to me. Like, if he wasn't, it would have been a goddamn nightmare.
And his side quests, you know, with his band and stuff were probably the best. But it's like it should have been his game. Like they're trying to do both things and they failed. So and that doesn't mean Johnny's bad. It's just he's bad for V, and that's unfortunately the perspective we're playing through.
Yeah, in more ways than one, right? Okay, so here's a question: do you think that Johnny Silverhand was always designed to be this AI in your head?
Yeah,
I think definitely because of the time gap. Like he died, and that event happened 50 years ago. You know, like
okay. So you think it was already pre-written that all that stuff was okay.
I don't think they rewrit the main story.
Yeah, I think that core like story of like Arasaka and having the chip and Johnny and the immortality stuff and this
because that's all taken from the tabletop.
Yeah, it's all building off that initial story. So that I don't think was ever like off the table. You know, it's just. One thing I think they could have done that would have kind of made it better is they could have waited to introduce Johnny. After you can have that initial heist, maybe for something else or whatever, and you actually get a chance to build yourself up in the city, actually make a name for yourself, and like get a reputation in these various parts. Maybe join a gang or two, and then Dexter approaches you or someone else approaches you with this mission in Arasaka, and then the rest of the game, which is what we got, happens. But you're already established. And perhaps how you've built yourself up will determine how you go about trying to fix yourself.
You'll have different allies and stuff. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a slideshow that we got,
and then you could.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that should have been the first at least half of the game.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
say.
Because really, when you look at it, the only thing you really have any control over is how symbiotic V's relationship with Johnny is.
Yeah.
Every time you drink, it gets better. Every time you allow him to take over, it gets more symbiotic. And I think there could have been a lot more variance in how the game plays out, depending on how your relationship with Johnny is at certain key points. And I think they definitely could have waited longer to have Johnny be there more. Maybe have him just be an idea in the beginning. Something like, as soon as he puts the chip in, you start having either these weird occurrences, these weird dreams, like, whatever, these weird behaviors that aren't necessarily yours, and the more you indulge into them, the more physical and the more tangible Johnny becomes. But they really just force it right in from the start. And
like it quickly, like I said, the game we were promised ends when Jackie dies. And then this kind of, cancer on those promises kind of takes hold. And what's there, it's good. Like this, Johnny's story as a character, it's good. I don't think it's like amazing or anything, but it's good. And if that was the sole focus, it could have been, but I think it leaves a sour taste in the mouth because it literally kills V. And you were told this is you. You were told you were going to be the driving force in this world and in the story, but you're instantly relegated
even by
and
the
have
end
no
of the
real
game.
impact. And you're
even by the end of the game, you still
die.
have a death sentence.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, you're still dead.
Like V's story is just pure tragedy. It's just garbage. Like his life just sucks.
In a funny way, it's almost like that kind of reinforces the story, because the story is about V's life being like taken out of his hands because of Johnny Silverhand, and in a way, that's kind of what happened in the story. Like for you as the player trying to be V, you get it taken from you because of Johnny Silverhand. It's like there's a parallel between you as the player losing your control over your character and V losing his own control to Johnny Silverhand. It's just funny how it worked out that way.
But I think that's what would benefit the most from having a first or two first acts without Johnny Silverhand, because then when that happens and you're emotionally invested in your V already, it would be that much more effective. But for me, it's just like, oh, okay, I'm going to be this V. It's like, oh, well, I can't actually be a corpo because the game wasn't built that way. And then, oh, I'm just Johnny now. Like I never connected with V, so I didn't really even care that he was going to just die, But if I had built myself up over, bunch of missions and interacting with the city, then it could have hit a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I still think V, depending, because I'm sure you guys all saw at least more than one ending. There were a few where V died that were really hurt more. Like I was curious about the suicide ending, and I felt absolutely horrible after doing it. I think maybe not so much because V died, but maybe more again because of the way when you watch the credits and you see your companions crying about you being dead, and I was like, okay, now I feel kind of bad about this. But
maybe the aftermath really hit home.
That again might just be because the side characters were more interesting, and V himself or herself is maybe less interesting. I felt V as a character, I felt was kind of not that interesting to me.
That's the whole thing. There's nothing there, right? Like I said, he's just a vessel for Johnny Silverhand. He could have been a character. He still has
dialogue. He still says things, and he still clearly has some identity.
Yeah,
but I always felt like it was at odds with what I necessarily wanted V to say, as me.
Yeah, and even if you were in line with it, there's never really an opportunity for him to actually do the things he wants to do, because his whole life is dictated by the fact that he's got a bomb in his head, basically.
Yes, and I think that one of the moments that specifically to this that really affected me was at the end. My first time I picked an ending, I picked the Arasaka ending, and you're leaving, and Johnny's arguing with you about would the old V have wanted this? And at that point, I think I got this kind of jarring feeling. I'm like, I have no idea what V wanted.
Yeah,
I'm like, exactly. I don't know what he stands for. I'm like, is this real? I'm like, is this against what he wanted? How am I going against it? I'm like, did I miss the entire point of V's journey? And I was kind of confused, and I tried different endings, and hearing V's perspective on things, when you play as a Johnny, when you're Johnny and you see V in the web, when you're in that space there at the end with the pyramid, it was cool to see V from an outside perspective. But even there, I was like, I don't really know him. It felt kind of strange at that point. To go with what you've been saying, Jacob, about not really having this fleshed out character. But again, he's more of
I feel like V was designed as a bit of an in-between between being a completely blank state and between having a very defined personality. Yeah. But nothing about what the game gets you through serves any purpose to kind of fill in that void of blank state. They fill in that void basically with Johnny.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very jarring at the end where it's like, I have to pick something that's in accordance with what V wanted, but I never got a chance to formulate that thought or that personality, that background.
I didn't.
So I had pretty much the same reaction. By the end, I picked basically just getting out of there, getting Johnny out of my head and getting out. And even then, I was like, I don't know, is that really what he would have done? I don't really have much to base my answer on, really.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is there was no V who was supposed to be the main character, never gets a chance to grow as a character, whereas Johnny Silverhand does, which is fine. But
not really. I mean, Johnny doesn't
more
really
so
grow.
Than V.
Definitely
Johnny
more so.
Doesn't really grow. He just parrots the same old things from the beginning to the end. He grows a little more humane towards V, But his main discourse is still the same.
Well, yeah, he doesn't change in the sense of what he wants to, blow up in his life, but he can be less of an asshole.
Towards Rogue,
nice
for example, his relationship with Rogue, I think, did show some character development a little bit. Like, he's a lot more kind-hearted, and he feels sorry. At the end, when you do his missions, and he's like, he loves her, he wants to go on a date with her, and like the Johnny in the beginning maybe wouldn't have been as inclined to do it, but he realizes like what death means and like how things he wishes he could have done before he died start to grow on him, and he like he does change a little bit. He still is the same person in the end. Like, he's still like the rocker boy terrorist thing that he's always been, but I think he becomes a little more compassionate to his fellow humans. Like, he's not just using Rogue. If you go with Rogue, he kind of does care about her by the end, which is
in his own way.
Yeah, well, when she gets killed, if you go with him and then with Rogue and then she dies, he's like, like, he really is upset about it. It's not just like, oh, there goes my driver.
Yeah, exactly. And once again, like all of these points that I'm hearing us say, it really comes right down to once again, V is just not made to be an interesting character. Like, I can't think of a single distinct moment. Like, and I've spoken to you, Jacob and Louis and like other friends of ours about their playthroughs and such, and like there's just like, what is their character? Like, I understand, yes, it's supposed to be like a player's interpretation of it. If that's the case, though, I feel like to an extent, maybe it would have been better as a silent protagonist, especially if you're going to have these long pauses of people just staring at each other.
Yeah.
I've often had problems with voiced protagonists in previously unvoiced things. Like, I've always had that issue with Fallout 4. I feel like voicing the male and female versions was just the wrong idea. Because it really set your character down a very specific path.
Well, yeah.
And from what I'm hearing from this, it's exactly the same thing, where V just kind of makes decisions like, oh, I'd never go back to the corporal life.
Yeah.
Whereas if you left it as just like a dialogue box for the player to interpret, and
It's the whole Skyrim
play
thing.
it that way, like, yeah. And once
The whole
again,
Skyrim thing where I don't mind having to write an interesting RP in my head about what my character is.
Right.
So long as I can take actions that kind of define
Reflect
that
it,
person.
Yeah, which obviously Skyrim's great at, and Fallout,
Skyrim was amazing at it. I mean,
the older Fallouts as well.
and I mean that's an entire other game that we can dissect, because Skyrim has its shortcomings in regards to that also.
Mm-hmm.
But it did that thing well where okay, here's the world you have to explore. If you're familiar with the Elder Scrolls, you'll have your Mage Guild, your Fighters Guild, and you pick what you want to go at.
Yeah.
Skyrim kind of pushed players into a direction, but again, it's besides the point. But it did a good job of letting you do what you want in an order you want, in a way that felt completely organic for your character. And because the character isn't voiced or doesn't have any meaningful interactions with anybody, you can kind of in your head make up the juice of the interesting stuff and have your head canon, if you will.
Yeah.
But having it voiced out so clearly and so explicitly as it was in Cyberpunk really solidified something that was nothing more than an empty shell.
Yeah.
yeah, it paints too much of a picture for a character that I think is supposed to be interpreted as a self-insert, right? It's supposed to be your own individual experience. Like, it's you experiencing Night City, but to have these pre-written dialogues, like, said in such a way, because like that's the thing with voice acting, it's not often about what is on the lines that you're saying, but like how you're saying it. It paints too much of a picture. It makes your character, it writes your character for you, and then asks you to make choices that ultimately don't really turn out to be anything. I don't know. It's a bit of a mixed message that they're trying to send.
I definitely get that, and I found myself telling friends about the game, and they were like, "Oh, what do you think of it?" When I was playing it, and I'd like do these little imitations of V, because I'm like he just doesn't sound like how I want him to sound. I just don't like him. I feel like every time he has a response, he's like, "Ah, shit, Jackie wouldn't have liked this very much." Like, I felt like I was like some sort of street gangster, and I was like, "That's not what I am." I'm like, I'm the corpo.
Yeah. Yeah.
I embraced it, and I was like, fuck it, I guess that's what my V is. I guess he's just like this kind of gangster guy. And that's it.
Yeah, they should have
I had to
highlighted the
find
street
reasons.
kid option. Be like, this is the main one.
Well, you'd say that. So here, did all three of you go corpo for your first playthrough?
Yeah.
Okay, so I went nomad, and I would say that, I mean, obviously a street kid, like I did the start and whatnot, and yes, there's a very clear lean in that direction. But I feel like there's even enough there that they started kind of branching off on a bit of a nomad path. because there's a lot of the dialogue options that don't really lead to anything. But if you look at just one of the endings flat out, like the Pan Am option is the Nomad option.
Yeah,
it's all about family.
Absolutely.
It's about this, and like I feel like I had a better relationship with Johnny because of that. Like that whole, who this side of the character was. So I feel like the work was there, and once again, it comes down to, I think Julian said it, time restraints. I feel like all this stuff was planned. Like if you look back and you see all the things that they had to cut, like the wall running and third person perspectives, I would have easily waited another year, 2 years for this game to come out. And I think it's a sad thing that we're seeing, and it's a product of the time that we live in. Where people hype is the biggest game killer, which is why I think Nintendo of all companies is doing a really great job with the new Breath of the Wild. They haven't said anything about it, not a goddamn thing. There was that first little trailer that's like, here's a bunch of cool stuff. It's gonna be dark.
They gave us enough to know that the game is coming.
Yeah,
to know what to expect about the setting. And I mean, The Legend of Zelda has always been this silent protagonist that just hacks and slashes at everything in his way. So people aren't expecting anything genre breaking or genre defining. But the expectations with Cyberpunk were completely elsewhere, where you had a studio that had given birth to what was easily one of the best RPGs in years. And then they said, we have a new IP coming up. So everybody got really excited just hearing that. And then the marketing team just took off and went way too hard, way too fast with these promises and these tech demos and everything they did, basically. Yeah, that was the worst idea. That was the worst idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. I think, in my opinion, that's the biggest reason for the game failing. I think because we're saying I would have easily waited a year. I'd like to say that, but I know that by the time around November when they pushed it again, I was like, oh my god, I just want to play it.
Yeah, there's no way they could push it again after.
No.
Yeah, and I now I think differently because I saw what it turned out. I was like, oh shit, it really needed some more time.
It really did need more time, yeah.
Because it's like they had the script, they had a lot of the finished product in its skeleton was there, but the game, in my opinion, wasn't finished. They didn't get the time to finish. I guess no game is finished, quote unquote, but they
not in
really,
the modern era, at least.
Exactly. So they didn't get the chance to do what they wanted, and that it is a bit heartbreaking for me because I feel like some people are probably going to completely shit on the game. I know that it could have been more if they had just had a bit more time and not announced that release date when they did. Yeah. They just pushed it a little more. They could have achieved something because it's on an upwards curve. I think that the more time they had, it would have accelerated in how good it could have been. Every extra month would have led to less bugs, which is a huge issue, and then on top of that, at least a few more of the promised features or things that could have added to a more coherent and cohesive story.
I think one of the first things they should have ditched in that development effort to make it out was to ditch previous gen consoles altogether. Yeah. Those consoles were way too old. Even when they announced the games, those consoles were considered to be aging and not aging particularly well, need I add. And I feel like a lot of their time and energy went into developing something that would work on these consoles, and it ultimately didn't. And that probably soured the image of the game to a lot of people that were expecting to play on those consoles.
Definitely.
I don't know if it's because they were expecting the next gen earlier, or if it's because they really had this idea that we can make it work like Grand Theft Auto did. Grand Theft Auto made it work on the previous gen consoles, and it worked beautifully.
Well, it started on the previous gen consoles.
Yeah.
It was made for the previous gen consoles because it came out on the 360, didn't it?
Yeah. And then they released on Xbox One when Xbox One released, and
yeah.
I think that there's a few compounded problems, though. I think that one, they wanted to release it on last gen because not enough people would have adopted the new gen yet, which is true. I don't think a lot of people have PS5s and Series X's yet because they're hard to get. Yeah. However, this cross-gen is so different than the PS3, PS4 gap because here we have kind of like a 3-console gap because we had the mid-console generation this time around, which is the first time we've ever had that. PS4 Pro and One X. So we had a stronger version, But the thing is, when any time a game is made for a PS4 Pro or a One X, it has to run on the base version. So it's like they had to make it run across 3 generations rather than running across just 2.
Mm-hmm.
So that led to some serious problems, and like they were set up for disaster. Like there is so little chance for success when you have to do something that intense for a console that's like 8 years old, to have to make a game run like it's already demanding enough probably on new hardware, and it also needs to run smoothly on old hardware. Like even if that were possible, you need a ton of optimization, and they did not have the time for that.
No, especially since they were using what's essentially a new engine. They were using an untested, unproven engine on old hardware, which might have been a bit of an issue. And also, to be fair, if we want to compare Cyberpunk to any of the previous games that CD Projekt Red published, I think it'd be most fair to compare it to The Witcher 1. And The Witcher 1 wasn't that huge success. It wasn't The Witcher 3 by any stretch of the imagination.
No, definitely more of a cult following than anything.
It has nostalgic value for the people who actually got into The Witcher from the beginning because they read the books or whatever. But comparing something like The Witcher 3, which had 2 games to lean on, and a new IP like Cyberpunk, which had literally nothing but a board game to lean on, or a tabletop RPG to lean on, they had a lot of work upon themselves, and I understand that they set themselves up with the hype and the demos and all of that, but we're also giving it a bit of an unfair comparison comparing it to Witcher 3.
In some respects, yeah. I mean, in regards to how much you get out of the story, for sure. Because I mean that was one of the, I guess, mistakes I made, is I was like, oh, I'm gonna love this as much as I loved The Witcher 3, which wasn't fair to it because there was no way it could meet the emotional highs of the 3rd game in a trilogy that's also the capper to a 7-book series. But so in that regard, yeah, but I think in every other aspect it is fair to compare it to The Witcher 3, and I think in a lot of other aspects as well, it fails in comparison to Witcher 3.
And I mean, that kind of leans into a question that I had, where how fast did your enjoyment of the game go away?
Oh boy!
Because in the beginning I was stoked; it was great. But how fast did it go away?
I don't think, for me, at least for me, it was as cut and dry as it went away. I think it actually left and came back and left again for me, because there were 2 different distinct moments. One where I had to come to terms with the fact that the game ran like absolute garbage on my PC at first, and I just sort of stomached it. Those like 15 to 20 FPS. I was like, this is okay, and then
everything's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like watching it stuttering, like having a seizure, and I was like, okay, you know what, maybe let's figure some stuff out. So I spent some time tweaking the settings, and I got it running at a stable 45 to 50, and I was like, you know what, that'll do. I'm able to play it now at least. And then I did that, and my enjoyment started to rise again. And I think it died again after that. I think I just played too much. Like I did everything, and my character became so strong that like I was like, okay, I crouch, take out my gun, headshot everybody, and then we're good. That's every mission.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you first.
I was just gonna definitely like, the difficulty caps out pretty early. Like as a netrunner, just like, oh, I have to clear this building. Well,
I can do it from my car in front of the building. Yeah.
It's over. Like. And so
you just go through the camera network and you just kill everybody.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's a lot of fun at first, but yeah, kind of towards the end, it can get a little stale. But for me, I was super into it at first, kind of drawn in, but it was well before the combat got stale that I started to lose a bit of not lose interest, but like enjoy myself a bit less. I don't have like a specific point where it's like, oh, but it was. Well, I mean, I say this, but like the first point where my hype dipped a bit was when your Corpo mission ended. I had like this.
Oh, like at the very
beginning.
That's early, yeah.
I had a little sink in my stomach. I'm like, uh-oh. But I was like, no, it's
Okay.
okay. And then it was great, and I still enjoyed it from there. I enjoyed everything up till like Jackie dying, seeing Johnny Silverhand and all that. But then some point between that and like, the end of the story is just, I just stopped. Like, nothing was gripping me the way I thought it would within the story. Like, nothing reached the same like intensity as that heist with Jackie. And that whole, sequence of events with Dexter to Sean and then Johnny coming in, like...
Yeah, that whole heist could have been an endgame in a lot of regards.
Yeah. If anything, I feel like, exactly that. They kind of blew their load a little bit early in the gameplay. Like, that whole heist, exactly like you should have said, should have been more mid-game. And this harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, where, like, the first 15 or so hours should have been you just exploring Night City, reaching out to contacts, kind of establishing yourself, but instead they just give you this great, this cinematic fucking explosions of colors and action, and it's there's a car chase and there's ninjas fighting you, and like it's great for opening, but then like nothing ever really gets to that level again. The closest thing I could think of maybe is the parade itself, and that's just because like the visuals are amazing.
Visually, but I felt like the parade was a bit of a disappointment as well.
Well, that's kind of going to go back to something that I wanted to interject a little earlier. Was just about the gameplay and the combat and the like. Wow. It on its own it's tight. The shooting is tight. The hacking, if anything, it only grows as you play the game because you can access
disagree with that.
Well, because you can start the game with
no variety until you get to the legendary hacks.
But that's what I'm saying, is that it eventually gets somewhere. Whereas with melee combat, with guns, for 99% of the time, you're doing the same thing, exactly like Julian was saying earlier. You start the game, you start the mission, crouch, you shoot everyone that you want to do. I was going gorilla fist, so I just crouched, walked in, killed the first guy, and then just beat everyone else to a pulp. And you're just walking around clicking the button.
Yeah.
Same can be said about the hacking.
Me,
breach protocol, contagion, suicide. Breach protocol, contagion, suicide.
But at least it has that... It does have an arc before plateauing, whereas I feel like everything else kind of just like you just start doing it and it never evolves. That's the problem with combat as a whole, is that it never evolves.
I played Netrunner, and I'm of those who weren't using the legendary hacks too much because they just weren't worth it. Like, I know that there's a lot you can do to make them more usable, to make them spread, to make them affordable even, just because they require so much RAM. But overall, you got more utility and more use out of just using the regular hacks. They were a lot faster to use, a lot easier to use, and you usually got the work done with them anyway. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to go crazy with the whole cyberpsychosis and the whole suicide, because the rest of your kit does the job just as well, if not better. So yeah, you get a step up, but is it a step up that's really an improvement, or is it just a cool step up? Arguable.
Both. I mean, I thought it like I like built my build around it. Like I got the cyber deck for it. So if I succeeded on my breach protocol, my suicide costed 1.
Yeah, I got to that point also.
So at that point, it kind of nullifies the cost, and I'm like, it's just
it was
fun. And I have
it was
spread
still
to 2,
more
so it
cost
does 2.
effective. It was still more cost effective to have the one that makes your stuff that spreads, to have the cyber deck that increases your spread, and just use contagion everywhere, because contagion usually
I mean, it's definitely a more efficient way, but it's also like it's more fun to have people kill themselves.
Jeez, out of the context.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody clip that, please.
No, it just always makes me think of the first episode of Code Geass, and I'm just like, yes, I'm.
Oh,
yeah, okay.
Oh, so good. My God.
Yeah. But yeah, so
I guess I'm the only one who played with guns, I guess, here. Like, I did use some hacking, but I was mainly just to shoot.
Guns I did the second playthrough.
Yeah, I did a lot of hacking, but I did, to kind of negate that, stagnation, had a good collection of guns too. Like I used tech weapons. I had Comrade's hammer. I had if I can't remember what it's called, but like the tech precision rifle. Like
yeah. I know exactly.
Or something. I don't know.
Something along those lines.
And I had a sniper rifle too. And a lot of times I would just go in there with Comrade's hammer because it was a one-shot kill on pretty much everything, and it could shoot through walls. So when I'm bored of the hacking, I would just do that.
Yeah, by the end I was using my gun a lot more just because the hacking was longer.
Yeah, no, it was quicker to just blow everyone up than to
I wanted to get the game done, and it was easier just to pull my gun out and headshot everyone.
Yep.
Yeah,
I was using the pistol you get at the very beginning, Dying Light, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going with it, and it was easy enough.
I started being non-lethal and being stealthy, and then I realized it didn't do anything at all,
No.
and I just started like shooting people in the head.
I did the same thing.
Because I think the mission that really burned me the most with that was, did you guys do the mission for the monk?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't kill anyone in that mission, and then Johnny's like, "Oh, you're just gonna go around not killing people?" I'm like, "I have killed millions."
Yeah.
Yeah, cut the crap, Johnny.
What are you saying?
You've been here. You've seen this.
It's a bloodbath. Like I think it would have been more interesting if that sort of thing happened only if you had been non-lethal and you were rewarded with a mission about being like a monk, kind of like you don't kill people. Like, do something about that because it didn't do anything in the end. I was like, well, fine, I will just shoot everyone if it doesn't give me anything. Like, nothing changes except for me being able to. I think. Okay, you know what? Just as a cap to what I'm saying here, I think what really made me realize how useless playing a non-lethal was when I realized you could just put packs on any weapon and just shoot everybody, and you're still non-lethal. So I was like, well,
I had a 50 cal, the big sniper rifle with headshots. Yeah, they're okay.
Yeah, no, they're fine. They're just knocked out.
Yeah,
They're still
it's just a rubber pellet, man.
From a 50 caliber type sniper rifle, I don't care if it's like a piece of paper. It's probably
I
gonna
can
kill
shoot
you.
through walls, but the guy is not gonna die.
Yeah,
no, it's just hurt. It's a big bag.
it's a
I can
flesh
still
wound.
remember the mission I was doing when I realized that trying to be sneaky and non-lethal was not useless, but probably a big waste of time. And later down the line, I realized just how useless it was. But there was a little side mission where you have to go into a restaurant to fetch back some eye upgrade from someone who lost it gambling or some nonsense.
Oh,
And
yeah.
You're expected, if you're trying to go non-lethal, to like sneak in the back and distract the guard or kill the guard. You have a dumpster bin right there, and the interior is really well configured to go non-lethal if you're going that route. But it took me forever to get it right. And then I actually did it right, and I was like, and what did I get for it? I got a bit of extra credit from the guy who gave me the mission.
Yeah.
And I was already at a point where money was like not really an issue. So I'm like, okay, but that doesn't change. Like, you don't have a karma system. You don't have a reputation system. There's none of this. So at this point, I'm like, I'm just going to try to go all out and see what happens. And nothing changed. So I was like, I might as well just keep killing those bastards.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. I still did the stealth missions when they asked me to. I was like, fine, I'll do it. But
I hated it.
I would be sneaky for some extra money. But I think what also made me feel shitty is that money... of course, did stop mattering as much at one point, but I wanted to get every achievement, and one of the achievements is get every car. And it is I did every mission in the game, and I'm not even close. And I'm like, the only way I could have enough money to buy every car is if I was constantly looting and selling, and even then, it wouldn't be as easy. I would probably have to craft and sell, and that's just like
tedious. Yeah, because there's a perk that you can take that's just going to decrease the amount of money you get out of loot. Because it's going to turn all the random white loot straight into components.
Yep.
Yeah, but once again, you kind of need that, and I feel like that a lot of these skills, they leveled up way too slowly. Like, especially in comparison to how fast you leveled up as a character. Like your street cred, you could like you can cap that out in the first like 8 hours, easy peasy. Just do some side missions, you're good to go.
If you do all the blue stuff, yeah.
Yeah, basically. I was level 50 street cred, 50 actual character level and whatnot. Like I had all my perk points in, but for the individual skills, they were still at like 7, 8 out of 20, And like I'd been doing the whole game, I've been using them. The crafting system, let's have a quick chat about that. I think it was kind of unnecessary.
I used it a handful of times to upgrade my hacking tools.
I used it also for weapons. Sometimes I was like, I want this weapon to be stronger, and I like the way it looks. I'll upgrade it, but it felt a little superfluous, especially since I would constantly be finding stronger stuff. That negated the fact that it gets so expensive in terms of resources to upgrade weapons after a certain point that I'm like, well, why am I even doing this?
And it's very time consuming when you get at the end and you have to craft multiple batches of upgraded materials.
Oh yeah,
and you're going at it one at a time with the usual little. There's a little timer that you gotta. You just hold A for 3 hours, and ultimately you'll have a gun that's one tier above what it was before. And yay!
But even that,
But
gotta
you
keep
don't need
progressing
it because you can just go killing stuff and pick up something better right off the floor.
Mhm.
Yeah, I did it because I had built myself to do it, and I was like, I'm going to do it because it's just a point of emphasis at this point. And yeah, I guess it wasn't really necessary, but I allowed me to keep, using what guns I wanted to, since they weren't my focus anyways. But yeah, I could.
And I remember early on in the game's release, there was a review that popped out where the reviewer had said something like, I never ended up using the crafting system, it's useless. And everybody gave that reviewer a lot of crap for it. But then we actually played the game, and yeah, that reviewer was right. I don't remember who it was. I think it was on GameBite? I don't remember. But
I think there's some sort of meta going on here with the industry and crafting, though. Like, I feel like it's like, it opens up so many possibilities. We have to have a crafting system.
Yeah.
the same can be said about just tagging RPG into everything. Yeah, your character levels up. That's an RPG. Like, not really.
No.
Not really. And that kind of circles down to the question I had prepared, where is this game really an RPG just because you level up? Is leveling up the sole mechanic you need to have for it to be coined as RPG?
I think there's enough customization that I would call it an RPG, but I'd say it's lacking a lot of things that could have made it a good RPG. I think it's weak. It's weak in a lot of ways, but it still has enough there that I would feel comfortable calling it that, even if it's a little more streamlined and more of like a accessible action-y kind of RPG.
Yeah, it's definitely a modern day RPG more than anything else. I think gone are the days of the classic JRPG tropes, like the Final Fantasy VIIs or the Chrono Triggers of ye old day.
Or like a CRPG, like Pillars of Eternity, like this isn't that.
Yeah,
I mean those are still around. I mean, Pillars of Eternity 2 is only a few years old, and
look at Baldur's Gate 3.
Like
that's pretty fresh.
But this is not that.
No, and it really depends on how you define an RPG, because it doesn't take much, but I think what's most telling about that, to answer that question, is how it was, initially it was advertised as an RPG, but I think it was on their Twitter, in their description and in other areas where they described the game. It was initially like a next-gen RPG in a dark future setting, blah, 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 blah. And then they switched it to a next-gen action-adventure, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So, they even knew that they were stretching it. Like, it's so weird because, like, you're supposed to be playing as, a blank slate character, yet I would argue, the RPG mechanics are tighter, like in Witcher 3. And depending again on what you need to have an RPG be considered RPG, even Witcher 3 is not like the most hardcore RPG, but it's definitely much more so than, or at least feels much more so than Cyberpunk.
I also want to point out, this is maybe a bit off topic, but I think this is something that makes it feel more like a simulation or RPG, is having certain items or features that RPGs have. So having like a food system and the drinks. And I found them just like there's so many things that like don't feel fully fleshed out like that. Like having food and drink rarely actually useful in the game.
When did it
I think I tried using the food once because I was having trouble with the fist fights.
Yes, exactly.
Until I realized what the issue was.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, this food's still useless, so I'm not going to use it and just render it all.
Yeah, I had so much by the end, and I was like, well, I'm glad it didn't weigh anything because I ended up picking up a lot of it. Only alcohol weighed a little, but in the end, I was like, well what? Like, I think it's really hard, and I played Outer Worlds very close to playing Cyberpunk, and Outer Worlds also had food, and it was like, why? I'm like, it doesn't do anything. It's just like a huge inventory, and I feel bad because you could tell so much time went into like, writing the descriptions, making the art for it. I'm like, I wish it actually mattered. Like, it doesn't do anything except for look pretty. I don't know if Outer Worlds has a survival mode where you have to eat. I think they might have that.
It does. I think they do. Yeah.
If it doesn't, then I'm sure a mod exists where you can make it a thing.
And that's the thing with things like food, is that you need the gameplay systems to support it, but most games aren't going to enforce that because that's too hardcore. That's why you need a mod to have to have any sort of survival elements in Skyrim, and why even like even a game like Fallout 3 in New Vegas, unless you play in the survival mode that
Or
New
Fallout
Vegas
4.
has.
Fallout 4 also had the survival mode.
You know, otherwise, yeah, it's not there. And
It's just inventory clutter at the end of the day.
Yeah, and if you're not going to include a survival mode, then there isn't really a reason for it to be there.
Mm-hmm.
It did feel a little cluttery, and I also have to say that I was a little underwhelmed with how they did cybernetics. Some of the because there was when I first saw the screen, I was like, oh yeah, I'm like, look at all these possibilities, and I was like, okay, well, I'm locked out of 2 because I didn't put 20 into the body, and then I'm locked out of 1 because I didn't put 20 into intelligence. So now all I have is like the subdermal one has literally 1 option for armor for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very limited. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed by
Say
that
that
as well.
about a lot of the mechanics and like to kind of build on limited. It's like the world itself too. Like okay, yeah, you look at the map and you're just bombarded with icon gore, but like what's really like it doesn't really provide as much as it looks like, and I think a lot of the times the city can feel empty or hollow as a result. Like I saw one person, it was like a Reddit post shortly after the game came out, and like the time I saw it, I was like, "No, well, you're crazy." But now I kind of see it. It's like Night City is like the Truman Show. It's all there for show.
Yeah.
And there's nothing really under the surface because there's like no way to interact with the city aside from those written missions. Like there's no like mini games. There's no poker. There's no drinking. There's no dice. There's I mean,
You can talk to every stranger you meet, but what do they have to say for themselves?
one line and they move on.
I know you.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Hey, get out
There's
of my
no
way.
like and they promised like a good AI for the random NPCs, but it's not there.
Oh,
It's just a
yeah.
cluster. It's nothing. It's just a randomly generated cluster of good job on making a lot of diverse ones, although you do see some duplicates, but they just kind of mush around and you can turn and then you can turn back and it'll be a different group.
Yeah,
So it's gonna
entirely.
vanish.
Exactly.
Don't turn your back on
Truman
people
Show.
because they change on you.
Yeah, and I get it's
Oh,
hard to like
morals.
create that many NPCs with a path, but like The Witcher 3 had decent sized world with NPCs that at least went inside at night and like had a place to sleep and did tasks during the day. Not necessarily as lived in as like the Elder Scrolls, but they had a lot more going on in that world. So yeah, but Cyberpunk, it's just like there's nothing there, and pivot this to a topic about exploration and how it just kind of sucks because you can't actually really explore the city because every fucking door is locked and like most of the buildings you can't go in unless for specific missions. There was one building I explored once and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like I just kind of stumbled into this and I'm like, I found like there was like, oh, there's a tarot card up here and it's a nice view, and then I left and I'm like, well, a while later I came back and did a mission. I'm like, oh, that's why this was here.
Yeah. Same
There's
thing
a bit of a parallel to be made with Fallout here, where at least Fallout tries to explain why you can't go into those buildings. Those buildings are destroyed, the door's busted, like whatever, there's a reason. But there's still plenty of places to go where it's just like, I'm going to go in that building even if I don't have to and see what's in there. And then you go in, you explore, pick up some random loot, get out and cross it off the map and move on.
And
But in this game, if you don't have a reason to go in somewhere, odds are you won't be able to. And I've even had it happen where they tease an area where there was loot. There was a guy standing in front of his door and I could see behind him a purple chest, but I could never get into his apartment. He was standing in front of the door, and by the end of the interaction, he closed it, basically making it impossible for me to ever return. And then I'm thinking, but why was there loot if I can't get to it? There's
think I know
no door I
exactly-
can get in from. There's nothing. It's just I had to go back to the guy to turn in a quest, and that was it.
Oh.
But they had still bothered to put loot in the room, and then I'm like, did they have more plan for this? Is there something I'm missing? But I don't think so. I think that's just how the game goes, of putting random loot everywhere. And
Free DLC mission coming up.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah.
Speaking of free DLC, actually, sorry,
Go ahead.
I know that they're plan. I read rumors that they're planning on making like some of those locked places that we're talking about. Some of them might be places you can live, because I know you could stay with your companions in the game, but you always have V's apartment, which also is a bit of a constant paradox in the game because V is like getting big and everything, but your apartment still is in this slum a building.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm the most famous criminal in all of Night City, and like I sleep in like a 1-bedroom apartment with like criminals right outside my door.
Yeah, 1-bedroom apartment in Mega Building 5, and it's just,
Yeah, exactly.
I drive like the nicest car in the world.
Yeah.
It's one of a kind, but like, yeah,
but
I
there's
sleep
still
in
a
here.
fresh body in my neighbor's apartment. Kind of thing.
Yeah, it clashed, and but I did like. I think that I was reading that some of the some of the locked places with it looks like there's things inside. They're suspecting it could be a future apartment or place you could buy. I'm really hoping that the free DLC adds some cool stuff like that. But
Yeah, sure it will.
I know they had planned in the beginning to have a system where you can have different apartments, if not change, just have more apartments.
would
But that idea was probably scrapped for time.
for sure.
But even then, how often did you end up returning to V's apartment? Other than when you had to for story
Less and less
reasons?
as time.
Oh, I
goes on.
never, I literally never went back unless the story drove me there.
They set you up with this apartment that's got basically a war room where you have like this area where you can store all of your guns, all of your weapons, and work on them. And this area is ultimately useless.
Hmm.
I think it was made even more disappointing by the fact that I don't know about you guys. I kept having some bugs with my storage where like the damage counters in my storage were
Yes.
always set to 0.
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it was like there was a lot. I had a lot of stuff in my storage, and it would take a while to kind of like load it and scroll through. It was just, it didn't feel very. It felt a bit clunky. Like if they had a categorization system for like, okay, I want to see my guns and my clothes, it would have helped. But they were all kind of just thrown into one thing.
Mhm.
I felt like that was kind of half-assed. I wish that would have been a bit more fleshed out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like in 2021 you don't really have an excuse for half-assed inventory management.
Especially when there have been games in the past that have done inventory so beautifully. The one that I could think of immediately is Resident Evil 4 with the attaché case and everything.
Ah.
Beautiful. To this day, my favorite storage system in all games. It was like
Tetris. You're playing Tetris while you're going through inventory.
Yeah,
with like fish and sniper rifles and hand grenades. And yeah, it was.
that kind of.
Oh.
I don't want to call it bare bones, but that kind of very limited. Diablo 2 did the same thing, or
Yeah.
Diablo in general
Yeah.
did the same thing. But it serves a purpose in the scope of the game also, because survival horror is hinges a lot on like limited resources.
Yeah.
And having to make a choice with everything you pick up of, do I have the space? Can I afford to keep space for this? But in a game like Cyberpunk, that kind of inventory management would make no sense, because you'd hold on to 10, maybe 15 items, and then you'd be stuck having to find a vendor to vendor it all.
Or, have a more robust storage system. Because the trunk of your car exists. You have a secondary inventory that you can call up at any point.
Which
But
is
why
another
would you
reason I
bother?
never ended up returning home. I just stuffed everything in the trunk of the car and off we go.
Yeah, for sure.
Be cool. If,
Just
like,
got- I
No,
think it
I
got too
think
messy
if you
for
want
me.
something that works, you just
yeah.
look at Sky UI for Skyrim.
yeah.
That's inventory management done right. It's
Yeah.
very extensive, maybe a little complicated for someone like at first glance, but once you get down to it, you get very granular, very specific inventory management. You can organize from every category that you can think of and work from there.
Yeah.
You have a very, very deep, very extensive system. Whereas in this one, it's a grid of everything you own. You can't favor anything to stop yourself from selling it or accidentally dropping it or
Or
accidentally
dismantling it.
which I've done more times than I can count.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then, oops, got a load, but your previous load is like 5 hours ago, and you're like,
Yeah.
Like, well, not worth it. Rip. Yeah. No, there's a lot of things like that, like little quality of life things, like having a barber shop. Like
Oh,
That was
God,
literally
why?
my
Yeah.
first complaint.
yeah.
Like,
I remember you being
not
very vocal
include
about
at least that. That's like The Witcher had one, and you were playing as a guy who has like 5 hair options.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I thought we would get like the ability to even like change our genders if we wanted to. I thought there would be there'd be such extensive operations you could do on your body
Yeah.
and like change everything. But no.
They went so hard to break that mold too, giving you the option of like in character creation to not just change your gender, but change the attributes behind those genders.
Mhm.
And then you get to the game and it's it was all just for show.
Size and everything.
It was all just for show because ultimately, like, unless you had the kind of bugs I was running into where you're just walking in the street with your dick out, like it just didn't matter, you know?
Just flopping out of the front of your pants.
Oh
yeah.
no, I've had that bug happen once where it was just like pants didn't exist anymore. And the lower half of everyone's body was just Barbie doll everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell is going on? What kind of shrooms did my character pick up? Like, man, this is intense. And then it just went away for no reason that I can explain. But
I also had the same problem in the inventory system where you'd open up your inventory and your character wouldn't have pants for a second, so your dick it would be like there or going through your pants.
Yeah, just like slowly flopping back and forth to the front of your zipper. Just like, what the? Zip that shit up, man. Come on. Jesus Christ.
Like, I overbuilt a computer hoping to avoid a lot of those bugs. Like, to put into perspective, like, I built an almost 10 grand machine for that game, specifically for that game.
Yeah,
I was like, I'm having none of it's okay. Long story short, it's a RTX 2080 Ti on a Ryzen 3950X with 64 gigs of RAM and
Jesus.
Like,
all right.
Yeah. I built, and it's water cooled to all.
Water cooled, yeah. He goes the whole 9 yards.
I went places with that build. It was fun, but when I started playing the game, I didn't run into those like frame rate issues or any of that garbage. Like, crowds were big, they were alive, they didn't cause bugs. I started running into bugs when like I was in a car going at high speed and then suddenly my character's T-posing above the car. But at this point, it's just that's flaw of the engine, and another one of the reasons that proves that the engine needed a lot more work. I feel like they tried in many regards when it comes to driving, that they tried to emulate the feel of GTA but completely missed the boat.
They emulated kind of GTA 4 more than anything, where you're just, oh, you mentioned boats, it kind of just feels like you're driving a boat everywhere.
It's that engine doesn't recreate physics very well, so nothing has weight. It just sticks to the ground as much as it can, kind of thing, and it feels weird, but I didn't run into most of the bugs, and even then, the experience felt like more and more underwhelming as the experience went on.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we were talking about like penises for a second there.
Good times.
Big old
I also
cocks.
I was a little surprised by like how sex was in the game.
I
thought it would be a lot more
graphic,
a lot more present. Oh well, no,
yeah, a lot more present, definitely.
Present, yeah, it was still pretty graphic, I guess. When it only happened to me when I only had sex, I think, twice in the game, I think.
I boned every stripper I could find.
In the tank.
I'm not saying that like they should have, but I was under the impression there was going to be dicks in the sex scene.
Yeah, I thought that too.
That's why I thought, like, when they allowed me to customize the penis, I was like, that must mean that it's going to be relevant at some point.
The penis.
Right? Because you can't, I looked at the customization options that you have for female V, and it's not as extensive. It's like tit size, ass size, and that's it.
Yeah.
But
there's one vagina.
It leads way to the idea that it's going to be a more present, at least, object in some fashion or another.
Yeah.
That's what I was
not at all. Not even close. And I feel like the developers at this idea of like, yeah, we're going to make this dark, edgy, like sexual thing where it's just like, we're not holding any of our punches. And then they started building the game, and marketing went like, I don't think you should do that. And then they kind of put the brake on it.
Yeah.
Because there's so many sex shops. I was like, you maybe could buy like a bionic dick
just
or
look
something.
at half the commercial.
Yeah.
Look at half the commercial.
Yeah, all
There's
the ads.
a quest about a guy with a modded dick
so
that goes
much-
on.
Yeah.
There's so much porn BDs that you just can't do anything
All of it.
with.
Yeah.
Like,
You could own them. You could have them in your inventory as a junk item, but like, good luck ever finding a thing to play it.
I mean, you own one of the reasons you have
the
to
one
play
strapped
it.
to your head, right?
You can't add one and one together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, not saying they, should have gone all the way, because I think part of the problem, part of why it got, not happened is because, there's a rating above M.
Yeah.
Hey,
You get that AO rating, like you cripple your, like,
Yeah, because you're no longer on Steam, you're no longer on game store shelves, you're basically a taboo in the industry.
They probably, they sell it on GOG because that's their own thing, but that would be it, like...
You could have AO on Steam.
100,
it's still more taboo. Hatred was AO, and it was like...
hatred.
Yeah, hatred was something else.
Yeah, I have it on good authority that there are some sex games on Steam. Okay,
Yeah,
that
I
certainly
can
show a
tell you
little
of
more
one
than
if you want to go
Cyberpunk.
buy it now.
Yeah,
I
but
mean-
Cyberpunk can't afford to lose,
Well, because
all
who's
the-
their audience? Because their audience are
There
people
is an
typically who
audience.
have at least seen a boob, either fucking digital or
I'm
otherwise.
gonna let you in
You're
on something. There
overestimating
is an
gamers.
audience.
Oh god.
There's definitely an audience. It's not necessarily a big audience. It's a very niche audience, but there definitely is an audience.
I guess. I mean, okay, I suppose I'm being insensitive not taking asexual people into the mix because, people are people.
But you don't
who
have
do
to have
feel.
sex. You
No.
also don't have to have sex in the game. But I'm
Yeah,
just saying,
exactly.
it felt like it was going to be a lot more present and like,
Mhm.
like it felt like this game was, like you said, it's like it's dark, gritty. It's like the sexuality is a big part of it. When you see so many ads in the game that are centered around sex,
Mhm.
prostitutes everywhere, strip clubs everywhere. The game is like the theme of sex is a big thing there, and I feel like you get to customize your own penis in the beginning of the game. It's just weird. Why would they have so much detail about something like that, and then it's so absent from the rest of the game? It
Never
was a little
gets shown.
strange to me. They even mentioned it actually in one of the demos that they're like,
Mhm.
"This is just one of the many people you have a relationship with in Night City. Like you could have different relationships, sexual relationships with different characters, and well, that's true. It's like severely
Somewhat
limited.
true, yeah.
Exactly.
And I mean,
yeah.
they painted the picture when they pitched the game. They paint this picture as like Night City being this like edgy, gritty thing, but sex is barely non-existent.
Mhm.
Drug use is non-existent. Like other than getting drunk at the bar, and even then,
and that's very limited.
Yeah.
like all of those things that would lead weight to them saying that it's a dark, edgy place. It is completely absent from the player to engage with.
Mhm.
Like the only drug use I can remember in the game, other than the red pill, blue pill speech,
Yeah.
was in the beginning of the corpo, where you open your disc and you got these like brain enhancers that you can, and then you're smarter for I don't know how long, and then you move on. But for the rest, like you can't just go on the street and buy cocaine and then go back to your apartment and fucking blow a line. You can't. Even if you wanted to, just for the RP of it, for the RPG of it, you can't.
Mhm.
There's
I
the robot guys who offer you also in the beginning of the game.
Yes,
Maelstrom.
Maelstrom. Yeah, exactly. Not that choice, because I've done both sides of that choice, and like it doesn't make a difference whatsoever. I feel like this game suffers heavily from half measures. They wanted to have this game with all kinds of sexual, exploits and whatnot. And yeah, there are dildos everywhere and shit. But like you said, the sex it's very tame. They wanted to have this huge, robust city with like a bunch of AI and whatnot, and it's pretty lame. It's actually kind of uncanny sometimes because like they're the guys in the driving who are just driving cars and whatnot, and the AI is awful there. But what really fucking gives me the shivers is notice how there are motorcycles all over the place, but you never see a single NPC aside from Pan Am in one specific mission. NPCs never drive motorcycle. They will never be on the road driving.
Oh my
And
god!
it's-
I don't think I
feel
ever
s-
noticed that.
I didn't either. I never thought about
Right?
that. That's
Yeah.
The only time you see them are when you're fighting the Tiger Claws. They have a couple motorcycles parked, but that's it. They're never being driven around, and it's a half measure. Why do you want to put this in, but not? And once
Put it
again,
in.
like not put it in. Maybe we're just being fucking mean because once again, production and whatnot. There was crunch and whatnot, but I don't know. It's like how. For all the time that it was in development, how have these things not been taken care of at this point?
CD Projekt Red knew that they had to be careful about what they said because No Man's Sky was already a thing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
No Man's Sky tried to bullshit its player base into thinking that this game is going to be something else. And then the game launched and everybody was like, what the fuck is this crap? And I'm happy to say, though, that No Man's Sky is one of those games that got the blessing of a renaissance and actually got better with time. And I hope we can say the same about Cyberpunk at some point down the line. But
Yeah.
the reality of it is that everybody in CD Projekt Red should have known to be careful and manage people's expectations, and they did none of it.
Yeah, I think that might have to do with publishing a little bit, marketing, and like the higher ups who are just like, no, push it, and they definitely they just bit off way more than they could chew, and like
Yeah.
they had people's goodwill from Witcher 3, so like they knew that they could sell. Like, they sold tons. They made like $2 million in profit in the first week. So
The
I
game
know
was
that,
gold before it even launched.
Yeah, I mean, they made the money back. They're fine, but the thing is that now they're hurt for the future. Like this does affect. Like it's the same thing with Bethesda. Same thing with with BioWare. It's like if you burn your player base more than once, it starts to affect. Like it's going to leave lasting impression. Like you may have made a lot of money, but the thing is now your future is at stake. So they really need to make sure that they either patch the game up like No Man's Sky, like regain their because I know that even The Witcher 3 had issues at launch. I'm just hoping they fix the problems that are there. They add those free DLCs that really add a bit more life to Night City, and then cap it all off with some fantastic expansions, and it could reclaim some of its glory. It will never be what it was promised, but at least get it.
Still have to be careful for the next game that they launch to better manage those expectations, because you don't get to make that mistake twice.
No, especially with a company like CD Projekt at least is making money off GOG as well. It's not everything or nothing with for Red maybe. CD Projekt Red just makes games, so
yeah,
they need to keep their reputation.
I mean, they still made a lot of money, so they can afford to do right.
They have capital to work with.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll go back and make a Witcher 4 to try to calm people down, or maybe they'll.
I hope they don't.
2078.
I'm of those who hope they don't.
Witcher 4 would be a ballsy move right now. They're definitely
very in disagreement with those IPs that overstay their welcome, and I think Witcher 3 was a nice capstone.
I mean, it was definitely an end.
Series.
Witcher 4 would be something very different story-wise.
What, you think it would still be Geralt?
No,
it would have to be prequel. It would have to be prequel.
Just be a different. Make your own. Witcher.
Make your own Witcher.
Or you play a Ciri and it's Ciri story.
Or
that's the only thing I could see that would be close in line with the other games happening. Because Geralt, it would just be that would be like, okay, like I'm gonna play it, I'm gonna get it, but this isn't necessary,
That's milking it.
Yeah.
Going back to the free DLC things, do you guys think that after all that's happened, they are going to follow through with the multiplayer DLC?
Yes.
Eventually.
Yeah, I think so too.
They banged too hard on it to just pull the plug on it.
Do you think it's going to be like a live service GTA Online kind of thing?
That's what they're
probably.
Oh my god, that's gonna be.
That's the image I had, but
some of the mechanics would make no sense though. Because if I have to pause, if there is no PvP, then maybe not. But because of how hacking works in some regards, and there's moments of pause when you're hacking, they'd have to change some of the mechanics work.
They'd adapt it for sure, I think. I don't think it would be very
protocol wouldn't work. The breach protocol couldn't work.
Yeah.
Not the same way, at least. It would have to work, and there'd have to be a different method of doing it. I'm sure they would. There's ways of achieving it, but they would have to modify and adapt a lot of the gameplay from the single player to the multiplayer.
Yeah, 100%.
Definitely. It would be almost like a different game.
Well, I mean, maybe that's what we'll see. Because, I mean, they've already gone on and stated that they're not working on that right now because, obviously,
they have
bug
too much
fixing hell to worry about.
The original game.
But I could see, after maybe 6 months to a year, after all the bug fixes are done, we could see ourselves with a very distinctly different game. Hopefully through those free DLC additions and whatnot. So, I'm trying to be hopeful about it. I'm just wondering how far back on the back burner are they putting this multiplayer thing?
I'm giving it 2 years.
Yep.
If by 2 years it's not out, it's not coming out.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of my initial thought. Yeah. Because they'd be definitely doing themselves a grand disservice to just release it now.
I mean,
with the game
Grand Theft Auto 5 proved it, that if you manage it well and build it right, people will keep playing 8 years down the line and keep buying the shark carts to get money in the game and keep doing the thing that brought Rockstar so much fame over the years.
I mean, it's successful, but man, is that ever tragic? As someone who doesn't like multiplayer, for me, I'm like, oh god, Rockstar, I miss you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
I agree with you on that one. Yeah.
Well, you see that Red Online. Business-wise, 100%. It makes sense to push a continued story and whatnot, and just a continued service. When you really, GTA 5 is a very interesting beast because it survived 3 console generations.
Yeah, that's not usual.
To be fair, it released when 360 was at the prime of its life. It didn't have to try to make it accessible to the higher end stuff, because having something that's designed for a lower tier and porting it to a higher tier is usually easier than doing what Cyberpunk tried to do of developing something that was meant for modern gaming and then try to make it work on PS4 and Xbox One kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, GTA 5 had the list of releasing at a time where it's just like an era of gaming was reaching its peak and it just rode the high kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Definitely right place, right time.
Yeah, and that's it's very indicative of that, because you look at the Red Dead Redemption 2 online, which has been suffering pretty hardcore of it's a very bare player base, but that's also mostly because the servers are just full of hackers and people exploiting the already dense servers.
Yeah, well, and I mean, from what I heard of Red Dead 2, it wasn't as engaging a game as GTA 5 was.
Not the multiplayer. The main story was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Because there's only so much you can do as a cowboy. And,
as opposed to jets flying everywhere and people parachuting with bazookas.
Rocket cars. Yeah,
I'm going to
flying
buy a
glorious.
neat cart for my horse, and that's about all the technology you had at the time. Like,
Yeah, basically.
you can carve whatever you want into the handle of your gun. I don't care. It's still just a gun.
So all that to be said, I guess it would be more of a GTA style for the Cyberpunk multiplayer.
That's what I would suspect, yeah.
That's scary
Yeah.
demanding from them after just trying
That's
to tackle a single player game like that. Like having an open city with multiplayer. Oh boy.
With multiplayer, and
Yeah.
what servers are they going to have that already exist? Because when you think about it, GTA's had servers for at least since GTA 4, since online was a thing. So they had something to kind of work with, and even then, I remember the launch of GTA Online. It was the worst. It was horrific. It was so bad. It took me like 3 days to log in, and then I got kicked 10 minutes immediately because I glitched through the floor.
I mean, I wouldn't expect CD Projekt Red to invest in building its own server infrastructure. I can see it lean on other giants of the business like Amazon or whatever, just to host servers somewhere else. But what that means is that if the popularity of the online game whittles down, they're going to have to close the service because for them it's an expense.
Mhm.
Whereas something like Rockstar, it's their own internal server and they make huge revenue off of it. So they really don't care to keep it active for as long as they need to.
Yeah. So I guess that's my question: is are they going to initially kind of have their own servers, or like you said, are they going to go through Amazon?
I
and
think
whatnot?
they're gonna have to have someone host the servers externally. I don't think they have the infrastructure, and I don't think they care to have the infrastructure. I could be wrong.
I have no idea. Like it is so out there. Like I kept hearing like I think someone even said the same thing for Last of Us 2. They're like, oh yeah, we're gonna make multiplayer, and I'm like, really? I'm like, it doesn't.
Why?
Like, I
It
don't
doesn't
think it
really
needs
yield
it.
itself to that. Yeah.
Just don't make something else. I feel like I'm like they could do something successful, sure, and innovative, but I'm like I'm also a huge multiplayer hater, so that's me. But I'm like, come on, like we don't need that. Like, why don't you try making something a new single player experience? But I'm just being selfish at that point.
But no, I
mean,
agree with you on
There's
that.
plenty of multiplayer games. They don't have to do it, like you're not being selfish.
I want more. I want like a modern gritty reboot of the Jack and Daxter trilogy. No, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want.
Baby.
Really long.
Yeah.
There's a
I
lot.
want to return to form from RPGs and from action games like Cyberpunk. Stop
Yeah,
trying to innovate. Stop trying to break the mold. Just give yourself a nice base to work with. Something that hits all the tropes and all the keys, all the keynotes. And then you can build to add stuff to it. And I mean, this has been a thing in gaming for a long time where bringing in new IPs is very complicated and very difficult because people can't refrain from comparing to IPs that have been going forever. And these IPs that have been going for a long time have a lot more to lean on, both in terms of previous lore and in terms of previous mechanics. Whereas bringing in a new game can be, like in the case of Cyberpunk, they tried to do too much all at once, and it came out as a bit of a hot mess of bugs and things that weren't really working, and not necessarily working well together either.
Yeah, I think that there's a pretty big conflict of interest between making a game also that's really accessible and one that would be very loyal to its genre. So like the more RPG an RPG is, the less accessible it would be to the general public. And with how much money is going into making a game like Cyberpunk, they're scared of straying too far from from something accessible, because then they might not make back the money they've worked so hard to spend.
Yeah, that's why you don't see a lot of, as you would put it, like true RPGs. And when you do, it's stuff like Pillars of Eternity that's completely crowdfunded.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing.
You get the public that wants a game like this to invest in a game like this.
Yeah, and then you get it, but you're not going to get like a big AAA devotion to it, because it's just it's too many people will be turned off. Like in a lot of ways, it's one of the great aspects about Dark Souls is that it managed to be very specific in how it plays, but still also managed to become very popular. But that's really rare. Like you don't just have to have like a old school mentality RPG to pull that off. You need to have that. Plus, it needs to actually be like really good. Like not just an average thing that like you would enjoy, but like something that
your example there of Dark Souls is an interesting one, because again, Dark Souls had previous history to lean on because they had Demon Souls before that. Given Demon Souls was a little smaller in scope because it was PS4 exclusive and it was a bit of an obscure game at the time, it kind of rose to be as big as it is because of Dark Souls. But at least they had something to work on, something to work with, a parallel to run against.
I still think that Dark Souls is a miracle to have existed with, like, when I got Demon Souls around the time that it came out, and I was like, this game is insane. It is so hard and not accessible at all.
Yeah.
I was like, and
you have to be a little masochistic on the side to like a game like this.
Yeah, and I was like, well, it makes sense that it's not as big. Like, not that many people know Demon Souls. And when Dark Souls was coming out, I'm like, yeah, it looks cool. I'll get it. But I'm like, this isn't going to be a trend that is going to become very popular. And wow, was I ever wrong.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Could not be more wrong. It created its own genre.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, exactly.
It became a kind of game.
Yeah, I never in a million years would I have suspected that when the game was coming out. I'm like, this is for a very niche audience. And to this day, it doesn't really make any sense to me. I know that people want challenge from games, but I feel like if you put that in any other context, that no one would get involved. Like, if you take like any big game and you make it way harder and more like punishing, but like fair, like it's harder to sell it. Like if you did that with I don't know, let's say Last of Us was way harder, would it still be as popular? If Call of Duty was brutally hard.
And more so than that, I feel like do all that, make it incredibly difficult, and you hide the main story in little details that players have to go and
everything is just in item descriptions. If you're not interested, you just don't, and you die knowing nothing.
Yeah.
It's a game that survives almost entirely just off its base mechanics. Like the story almost doesn't matter to, I'm going to say, a good 70% of the people who play it. They just want it for the experience, and yeah, in many ways that is a miracle. And I feel like we're probably not going to see something like that for at least a fair amount of time.
Yeah, but and in all respect to Dark Souls, like it nailed everything it had to nail so perfectly, where everything from the theme behind Hollowing to just the art, the direction, the cinematography behind it, everything was so spot on. The music was, oh my god, I still listen to it on my iPod. And like it's one of these things that it became a classic because it did everything it had to do right. It didn't try to do too much, but what it did perfectly, or almost as close as it could to perfectly.
You see, that is such a massive risk. That's what we're talking about. Like Dark Souls is such a massive risk, and it's unbelievable how much it basically rolled a perfect 20 on making a game and marketing it. It just worked perfectly. Where Cyberpunk, they put I don't even know how much more money into development than FromSoft put into Dark Souls.
Astronomically more,
yes.
I'd imagine.
Yeah, and they're like, and the more money you put into a game, the more that like you have all these executives being like, you can't take this chance. Like we can't afford a huge risk like that. Let's try and play it safe with some of the gameplay. Let's try and play it safe with this because we can't afford to divert too much from what.
Are you guys willing to play a little game of guessing?
Oh yeah.
If you had to guess how much development cost for Cyberpunk was, what did you say?
$6 million
for development or for marketing?
That's not right.
Development, including marketing and all of it.
Ooh, I'm gonna say $60 million,
including marketing and
$100
million.
Not even close.
I'm gonna say $1 billion.
Billion?
No.
$313 million.
God damn, was I wrong? Okay, I was like $6 million. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. $60 million? I'm like, okay.
$60 million, okay, but
$1 billion. Like, no, okay, no, nothing to
Destiny was $500 million. and that I think was one of the most expensive games
Yeah,
to
I
market.
remember
And
that.
Destiny
developers-
1 or 2?
One.
One was
And
one was
interesting
oh my
comparison,
God.
GTA 5's development budget was only 265 million.
Man, those guys are rolling
Wow.
in it.
Honest. Well, yeah, especially now. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That paid off. That paid off more than ever. GTA.
Easy.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk did make back its
They
cost.
did.
I
Yeah,
believe.
it did, yeah.
They did not waste
And then
their
some,
money.
yeah.
They did not lose money. They just lost everything else.
It's but what's more important down the line, the respect of the community or the money you make on the one game you launched?
I have to wonder. Us four were people who play a lot of games. We had
What?
expectations of Cyberpunk. Yeah, I know, surprising. But I have to wonder, what does Cyberpunk look like to someone who maybe isn't as big into hype and like following a game? They're just like, yeah, I heard a bit about this game. Let me check it out.
Funny you say this because I'm not someone who follows the hype in a lot of these. Like, sure, okay, they'll announce games. I'll watch the trailer when it airs, and then I'll disconnect from it all because I don't want to fall for that hype and know ahead of time everything they had planned and then be disappointed when the game comes out. And I can tell you I was still disappointed by the game as it was.
Ouch. All right.
However, I think what Julian was saying more so was that what is
I
the
am a
average
26-year
casual gamer?
veteran gamer, so
What's
yeah.
what's going through their head when they see this, as opposed to like, yeah, let's be real, Louis. Like you've been playing about as long as I have, so at least 20 years.
I've been gaming for 26 years.
There you go.
But
Right.
at the same time, would a casual jump into something like Cyberpunk as its
Oh, yeah.
first few game?
Well, I mean,
I wonder, though.
if they're playing games
I
around this
don't
time,
know.
yeah.
And honestly,
Because
I
it's
don't think
everywhere.
so.
No,
I
think
would-
the way it was marketed, it would draw in exactly those people.
And especially the timing more than anything.
Hence why it
because
broke the single player record of concurrent users on that first night. Like, had over.
Oh, yeah.
Steam crashed for me.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, that's not just a bunch of, dirty neckbeards like us, like there's a lot of other stuff coming from that.
And especially it's the time of year, and it's just the time of the world right now. Like we're in the middle of the whole
Yeah, I
COVID-19
think that
thing.
had something to play with it. I think that
100%.
had something to play with
On
it.
top with the
You
very
had a
aggressive
mass
marketing.
of people that was
Yeah.
just waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, because the aggressive marketing, like that, I was getting insane amounts of ads, like on everything. In
Yeah.
Cyberpunk.
I'm of
So-
those who had the luxury of keeping on working during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that whenever I wasn't at work, the only thing that I was exposed to at this point was Cyberpunk.
Yeah,
Because
it
people
was
just
everywhere.
couldn't wait for it to come out. People just couldn't stop talking about it. It was everywhere.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely would have had an appeal amongst the,
The casuals, yeah.
casual gamers. Yeah, no, definitely, because of the marketing and because it marketed itself as something for everybody. Like here's your opportunity to be you in this.
I think it marketed itself as something for every adult because they definitely made it clear from the get-go that this game was aimed at adult gamers.
Yeah, well, it's the same with The Witcher, but yeah.
All adults have a lot of money, so it kind of works out in the end. As it turns out, not that GTA 5 is GTA 5 Online, I would say, is maybe marketed more towards anybody, like kids included, who are probably going to play it.
Yeah, more the teenage.
Yeah, how old were you the first time you played a GTA game and just did all the codes to shoot everybody down in the street? Like,
I was small.
Way
I was
too
small.
young.
I was a wee lad.
I was 9 years old. It was.
I should young enough that I shouldn't have been playing.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
definitely not.
definitely.
It just goes to show how children can be very sadistic.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, it's just like it's also the appeal of playing something that's maybe a bit like you're not supposed to, and like as a kid,
it's watching South Park as a kid, basically.
yeah, it's edgy.
You're
It's like
doing it in
feels
secret.
wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I remember like that was actually a part of the appeal for me as a kid. So I don't know, maybe my parents probably wouldn't have wanted because it's such a big production that everyone sees it. Maybe my parents would have known about it, wouldn't have wanted me to play a game like that since they were the ones who were able to buy games for me.
Mhm.
It maybe would be harder for me to get a hold of a game like Cyberpunk, but I mean that didn't stop me from playing like Resident Evil 4. So
Yeah.
What-
yeah.
No, and with the
Exactly.
way Steam is nowadays, like all a kid needs to have is ask mom once, put your credit card here,
Yeah.
and then later down the line, just Mom, can I buy a video game? Yeah, okay, and then you just buy the game, and
holy shit, it's
on the
true.
receipt it
Yep.
just shows up as
Steam games.
video game, and
Yeah.
Oh my god, I didn't even think about that. Like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine what it would have been like to be a kid now.
Oh, with
I was the
Steam.
kind of
Oh my
kid.
God.
I was the kind of kid that got my parents to buy him Dragon Ball mangas, even though they were violent as all
They were
hell
very violent.
and very
The
graphic
Yu-Gi-Oh
in the
mangas
early
were
on.
violent.
The
But that's
Yu-Gi-Oh
like-
mangas were dark as hell, man.
But those
I
are
was so
unsuspecting.
shocked.
Yeah.
Those are because I wouldn't know. I feel like if my kid was like, I like this manga, and it was like, to me, I understood it like, oh, that's just Pokemon.
yeah,
and then
he's
in the
just
manga,
reading
it's like
stuff.
bloody.
Yeah.
Then I would be like, uh-oh. But I wouldn't have probably noticed. Whereas I feel like games, like, I remember parents around when I was younger, my friends' parents were always talking about GTA as if it was like the only violent game. And meanwhile, their kid is playing like tons of violent games, but it's like, no, but GTA is worse because, I don't know, it has prostitutes in it or something. Like, I don't know what the reason was.
I was alive.
Yeah.
I was alive and very much aware when Mortal Kombat did all that. Basically, the whole Senate hearing about like art video games and basically the birth of the ESRB, where video games were.
You saw
tried.
that?
Yeah.
Holy shit!
I was very
Okay.
young and I didn't really understand what was being said, but I understood that there was a video game somewhere on the Super Nintendo that had caused problems, and the industry had to change because of this. I was very much alive and very much aware of that.
Yeah, no, it was Mortal Kombat.
It was
and
Mortal Kombat because of the blood,
Night Trap
because of the
also.
Night
fatality.
Trap. Yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah.
exactly. Because of different reasons. Obviously, it wasn't blood and
Yeah,
gore. but
Night
it all
Trap
the
was
suggestive
more of a
values.
like murder simulator.
Yeah.
It was really, really weird.
It was a bit sexual too, so I think
Sexual
Yeah.
for teenagers, so it was really sketchy playing on an feline.
yeah.
Nice
It,
there.
I still think that to this day, though, like when we look at like let's look at Cyberpunk for example, the fact that violence, although Mortal Kombat it was really edgy at the time. Now violence is a lot more commonplace in games, and it's more expected. But sex is still like
Yeah,
the
super
fact that
weird.
you can, the fact that there's even your character's genitalia in a game is like that's crazy. Like I've never really gotten that.
I
before.
can't think of another game that I've played.
I
at
can.
least. I know there's been
I
a couple.
can.
With dicks,
It's
but
definitely not AAA titles.
no.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
can. And the main point of those games is usually the sex.
At that point, it's like a porn game when it's or
Yeah.
if it's not, but if it's not a porn
Erotica.
game, yeah, but exactly.
The line between what is erotica and what is softcore porn or hardcore porn at this point is kind of, again, very hard to draw very clearly.
But it's at that point, like when it's not showing up in erotica at all. Like I wouldn't consider Cyberpunk erotica,
No.
but
Definitely not.
but the thing is, it's so unusual to see nudity that explicit in an M-rated game or a game that's not oriented towards being sexual. Like the whole point isn't having sex. Sex is just there, and having the ability to see your character naked. I remember even God of War, the first few God of Wars when they would have like sex mini games. That felt crazy to see something like
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
But seeing a penis in a game is like very unusual to me. Like it's something that we'd see people get their heads torn off and like their livers torn out and
Oh yeah, no problem.
through their face, but we'll never see like a penis. And,
Oh,
like,
pixelated
it's like-
penis. Oh god.
call the church.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's funny you say that because I could still to this day remember my first video game penis, and it was GTA 4.
The hot coffee mod.
No, GTA 4. The first expansion, there was a particular scenario where like you're just talking to this
Lost in the
politician.
Damned?
Sorry?
Isn't that the Lost and the Damned, the first expansion?
Yes, exactly. The Lost of the Damned. There's this thing where you were talking to this politician, and like he's like the guy's clearly naked in the cutscene, but like it's always coy with the camera angles. So you don't quite see it until the very last scene where he just turns around and there's a penis, and like he just the game is so matter of fact about it. And I remember like this was GTA, and like I had played through the original game, and it was it's GTA, so there were some shocking themes and whatnot. But I still remember being so shocked at something like that. So for a game like Cyberpunk to go and to include something so I'm going to still say taboo as genitalia, and then not really do anything with it, it just kind of felt like it was just phoned in. Like, haha, look what we got. It's a penis that you could never really see unless you take off your pants or unless the game is feeling glitchy and such. It's just, once again, going back to the half measure thing, why put it in if you're not going to do like make a statement out of it? Like what's the point then?
And I feel like video games is, of all the cultural medias out there, still the most shy about sexuality. But I feel like sexuality as a whole is still very taboo in a lot of other forms of media. Maybe not as much
Western.
as much as in video games,
Yeah.
but it still definitely is, and there's still a lot of talk to be had about this.
I just think that there's kind of a funny aspect to that, because like there's these really strong puritanical vibes to like how video games and media in general in the West are handled. Yet like it's like violence, which is legitimately like maybe more damaging for people to see, are more dark and like really disturbing to see, like someone like some of the fatalities in Mortal Kombat, like the new ones, as opposed to
Rip
like
the spine out.
as opposed to literally just seeing a naked person. It's like a naked person, like you can't sell that, but like Mortal
A
Kombat's
naked
fine.
person with their chest torn open, that you can sell.
Well, as long as you don't see their penis, it's okay.
Yeah. Cover the penis, rip their chest open, you're good to go.
Or female breasts, very specifically. You can't show
Although
those.
That's been
that's
more relaxed lately.
progressing, yeah.
Yeah.
in
There
games
has been
specifically
progress.
breasts.
Yeah.
Like you'll see that, like even like I'm thinking as far back as like Harpies and God of War or Dark Watch. Like there's a sex scene which I remember being really freaked out by as a kid. Like I'm like, there's a sex scene in a game, and that's kind of awkward.
Yeah. And I think that's part of it too, is with games, and like it's always awkward because it's like pixels and polygons having sex, and like it's just you can never get like the, or at least very, very difficult to get like the intimacy of like in a movie or something because it's real people. Or
I
if
mean,
you're reading
you can get
but,
the
like,
mocap done if you really want, but
You
how
can, but
awkward
it's-
would it be to mocap a scene like this?
Well, I mean, some do that. I mean, like I think
On that
and
note-
Cyberpunk
People do.
mocap their sex scenes, and it's like it's still like weird.
Again, because of the forced first person perspective.
Yeah, but even in like the third, like the Witcher sex scenes and like other sex scenes, it's always kind of like just weird.
It's weird, yeah.
Well, here, has everyone played The Last of Us 2?
No.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Right. So what about that sex scene? Those who
Okay,
saw it.
okay. I have a feeling this is going to open up
Yeah.
some other
Oh my
cans
God.
of worms.
Yeah, how far
how
from the
dare you
actual
bring
show
up The
notes
Last
did
of
we
Us
wander
2?
off?
Do you?
No, you're right.
have
You're
the
right.
rest of the day.
You're right. Editor, cut that. Never mind.
that is like that's not only its own fucking episode. It may be multiple. Episodes.
Yeah, exactly. But okay, so then here, so let's bring it into something a little bit more recent.
Yeah.
Everyone's heard about the Mass Effect remaster and how they're gonna
Where they
adjust
changed
camera
all the movie
angles.
shots.
So you could have a game like Cyberpunk, which is, I mean, like they're kind of blatantly showing all they got, and then, but now the remaster for Mass Effect, they have to censor it. Why?
I'll tell you why I have an issue with it.
Like, what's going on?
Well, I mean, obviously,
I don't think they're doing it out of censorship. I think they're doing it out of reimagining the cinematography behind it. But those shots still serve the purpose 9 times out of 10. That's one thing I can't hold against BioWare for that, because most of the shots that are going to be changed were of Miranda, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Which, if you play the game, you know she was engineered to be just about the
Perfect.
most perfect woman
Yes.
that there is. Those shots are there to enforce that idea that being perfect for her isn't just about being the smartest, being savvy. No, she's also very attractive.
Yeah, but she's
And
so
she's
hot that the
also one of
camera
the
is looking
romance
at her ass, you
options.
know?
So I mean,
Sure!
it's like everything's perfect, including the ass, and we will show you.
including the ass. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
they
But
want
I
you to
feel-
feel that to your core.
But I feel like Miranda. The reason I have a problem with that is just kind of like Miranda's. I find a very two-dimensional character. I think that like she's really there just to be the sexy babe in the game. But like I don't need there to be ass shots of her. Like it's not like a deal breaker for me. But it's just like I feel like it's weird. Like we're pretending like, oh no, she's a character with a lot of dignity and depth. I'm like, no, I know why you made her, and I know how you wrote her, and it was like deliberately like it like you can't really play coy with that and hide the fact that to me it really seems like she's just there to be like
She's
the
there
love
to be the
interest.
femme fatale, and that's about it.
Oh yeah, 100%. But like
The same way,
own
the
it.
same way
Don't
Liara
try to
played that
repackage
role
it.
in the first one.
Well, Liara.
Liara had more depth. She had more depth, but because of how Asari are described in the lore of Mass Effect, Liara played that role in the first one, or
They're, like,
Asari in
promiscuous,
general.
yeah.
They're
There's a lot of
promiscuous,
sexual
and they're
fantasy.
always represented as the idealized version of a sexual partner for whoever's looking at them. We
Yep.
technically don't know what an Asari actually looks like because
Yeah.
we always see it through the eyes of humans.
Yep. always thought that was pretty cool. That's probably one of the things without going too far into Mass Effect discussions. I really liked that they had a lot of science or like a lot of explanations behind the lore of their world.
Yeah.
That was legitimately interesting and not just fluff. It like was like, wow, that's kind of thought provoking. Makes you kind of wonder about the surroundings and it impacts conversations and stuff as well.
Yeah, you can even say that about Miranda because you do talk about the fact that she was made to be perfect and how that's impacted her life and like
it bothers her because she looks like a Barbie, you know, like
and because she always gets judged for it, like at least like the game, all right, let's gonna put some ass in the game, but we're gonna like at least try to explain it. It's not just
provoking ass.
Exactly.
There's a reason it's her ass and not others,
Yeah.
But
I'm wondering if they're going to repurpose the ass shots on Garrus. I'd be pretty happy about that.
They better.
I want to
fucking There's
Like
only one thing on that
take
tip I
away
want
the ass shots. Give everybody ass shots.
Exactly.
Or I mean,
Gordon.
Quality, I
you
want
can
that.
have an interesting
Right?
symmetry where you have ass shots of the female characters and then crotch shots of the male characters.
Krogans, yeah. Grunt
Exactly.
and Rex.
3-headed fucking dicks, that's what it's all about.
Jesus
All those
Christ.
testicles.
They had 4 testicles.
those-
3
yeah.
dickheads. That's what
I
it
did
was.
not know that.
Yeah.
Krogans usually have spares of every
Oh, and the
organ.
codex, man. That codex is
My
The
fucking
God.
codex, if you dig in the codex, there's so much lore to be found. And I think Cyberpunk could have learned a thing or two about having a codex like this.
Oh,
It
The
did.
way
They
all
did.
it had
They
was
did in The
garbage.
Witcher 3. They have
Yeah.
so much in The Witcher. They have a bestiary, a character section. They have everything there. Fucking
there was too much fluff in Cyberpunk in terms of stuff to read. I remember just like especially
Well,
like
that's a problem I
5
have
hours
with
into the
gaming
game,
in
I'm
general.
mashing through things.
Like even Valhalla when it came out, like you keep
Yeah.
finding these little notes that you're like, is that information going to be relevant at some point? I don't know, so I better read it all. But how quickly did you stop reading it all? Especially in Cyberpunk, when in Cyberpunk it was ridiculous.
Only really, really at the end I stopped because I like reading all those things in games, especially if I'm into or like The Witcher's got plenty of notes. Although I think I do agree Cyberpunk had a bit too many, like how all the fucking little missions had a little thing at the end, and you're just like, oh, okay, I gotta read this.
Had like 3 emails from some random guy talking about dick enlargement. Like,
Whereas,
like
the stuff
I
in
don't
The
have
Witcher
a problem
was,
with reading in video games. Like I've played Final Fantasy VI. I don't know how many times, and the entirety of that game is just reading. But it's that the reading in Cyberpunk felt very irrelevant. Like you get this email between a drug dealer and his source, or between a police officer and some guy in the street, and it's just like, okay, but what depth does that give the world?
Yeah,
Honestly, not much.
because the whole point of those types of interactions is to just expand the depth of the world and the lore, and I feel like they definitely accomplished that in The Witcher, because he had a lot of that kind of stuff. And then there was occasional personal notes. Like one of the things you come across in The Witcher is you see this soldier like just hanging from a tree dead, and you could pick a note off of him that he got from his wife, hoping he comes home, unlike his brother and his father who died like in the last war. And it's like they just worked better than they did in Cyberpunk. And you have that on top of the lore building things that all just kind of work together, where Cyberpunk, it felt like they were just there to be there.
I think part of the reason that it felt kind of disjointed was also because of the way that they organize it. I think the UI, like if you think about the codex in Mass Effect and how it's organized, it's a lot clearer. If you go into the codex section of Cyberpunk, there are 4 other like tabs, and one of the others is not even, doesn't say other, it's just a blank tab, which could just be a bug, which it probably is.
Probably.
But I have like a ton of tabs that are just, they don't really have a title. It's just like a mountain of like 93 different things that are out of context and have no purpose. It would have benefited from having maybe a better UI. I think that would have changed everything for me on how you read it, because like I didn't always want to stop what I was doing to read an entire codex entry in the middle of combat, but I would go back and read it later. But there's just too much, and I don't know where to start, and it was just a bit chaotic in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry. Yeah.
Next question.
I don't think we really touched on it too much, so let's dive into side missions, side quests. So like the gold ones, the blue ones, like the main ones, the companions, all the side
I believe
content.
the blue ones were the lowest tier side quests.
Yeah, those were like the miscellaneous, like just...
And I'll tell you how they did those. Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V.
Yeah.
It felt very Assassin's Creed 1 where you just go to a new district and you have to do these same cookie cutter missions over and over.
I'll be honest though,
Although
Assassin's Creed 1 did it better. Assassin's Creed 1 still did it better. Because yeah, you were still doing all of that same, okay, you're going to trail that guy, you're going to kill that guy, you're going to steal from this guy, or whatever the order was, I never remember. But it was still very cookie cutter in how you got to engage with the area. But the conversations that were had during the shadowing people, the people that you'd run into or that you would spy on, actually had things to say. It felt more alive than it did in Cyberpunk. Half the time in Cyberpunk, if you get to a blue mission, there's people gathered around a suitcase somewhere. You kill them all to get to the suitcase, and then you're out.
Yeah, and then you get a pretty much, useless little shard of information.
Yeah, here's a chunk of change and something to read.
And then you get that little call from the NYPD dispatch that's just calling to all the subcontractors, we have beef here. And then you go there, you kill them, and then it's okay, problem resolved.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
I would have at least loved some sort of side quest that you get for doing all of them. Like you work for the NYP and CPD.
And CPD, yeah.
Sorry.
That's fair.
And then they're like, okay, well now you do something for them because you've done so much to help, or maybe that affects the way other people see you because you're working with the cops so much.
Some of the fixers
100%.
might not want to cooperate with someone who's also working with the cops.
And and you should have had the option to not gun down the Tiger Claws because hey, maybe I want to join the
maybe
Tiger
I want to
Claws,
work with them. Maybe
you
they
end up working with them half the time. The what's her name? Wakanda something or other?
Wakako.
There you go.
In Japantown?
Yeah, you have a pretty decent relationship with her, and yet every time you see the gang members, it's like you're a nobody.
They're usually, them and Maelstrom are usually pinned as being the bad gangs.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's the Mox. You never really fight. You never really get involved with the Moxie. The Voodoo Boys are people that you interact with a little bit, but you don't really see them in the streets.
No, because you don't really go to Pacifica for any other reason than the one quest that takes place in Pacifica.
Or the myriad of little side quests that are completely useless.
If you want to. Because I was going to say, the gold missions aren't really that much better than the blue ones.
Yeah.
They got a bit more fluff because you get a little, more in-depth phone call from the fixer.
There might be an NPC involved.
Yeah, there might be. Well, occasional ones have an NPC you can interact with, but a lot of them.
I think it depends.
Thing.
I think it really depends, and I think that's another disservice again that the UI does by having no variety in the goddamn pins. Is by they had this is a stealing one. This is a sabotage one, and then everything is just exclamation points. I found some of my favorite missions when I went through them, but I'm I wish that they stood out a little more than just, oh, here's a job, get me this, I'll pay you. Sometimes it wasn't a subcontractor mission. Sometimes it was a talking vending machine with a crazy arc.
Yeah, you get the
occasional,
but those are so few and far between. But there are a few really good gold quests. Yeah, but there's the exception, not the norm. Whereas Julian, I kind of equate these missions to the monster hunts in Witcher 3, which were so much more involved and so much all the gold all of them were good. It wasn't just oh, here's one with a talking werewolf. No, all of them had depth and decisions to make.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes sense that it was that way because the be all end all for The Witcher is that he's a monster hunter.
Yeah, and
if they had done that wrong, then the whole point of that game, the whole hook of it was just gonna fall flat.
Isn't that kind of the case with Cyberpunk? You were supposed to be a mercenary.
And that's why it's disappointing.
Yeah. And so these should have been the bread and butter, the way the monster hunts were in The Witcher 3, of that top tier but second level gameplay, interactions. They were just those things got stale quick. I didn't do them all. Yeah, I didn't finish all of them. I was just I can't.
I did most of it.
Especially once I started getting a little sick of the combat loop, and then I'm okay, now I have no reason to do these whatsoever.
I did most of it, but that's why I ended up resorting to using a lot of guns at the end, where all of the blue missions that I was completing were easier done just gunning everybody down.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then the yellow ones, some of them were very convenient to do with hacking because, again, I can kill everybody in the building from within my car if I can see a camera.
Yeah.
I feel in many ways, it took some inspiration from Breath of the Wild in the sense that here's a bunch of little missions that you could basically knock out in under 5 minutes a pop, like what with the shrines and Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild was a disappointment in that sense for me.
Yeah, but that's the kind of what I'm getting at with this, is that they gave you bite-sized pieces of missions. Like I could have easily been satisfied with a quarter of both the yellow and the blue missions if it meant that they were like 3 times as long and actually
I feel like that's been a trend in the gaming industry where they're designing it more and more to be consumed in bite-sized chunks, where you play very little bit at a time. If you want to play for longer periods, then you'll just do more missions. But that comes at the cost of those missions often feeling very repetitive.
And it's actually kind of a good point, because that could tie into like the main side quests, the ones, you know, the ones with the companions and stuff, and how they're broken up. Like you can't just meet River and do his quest line in one go.
I'll call you back in a day.
Yeah.
And then you wait
and
for
then
a
maybe
phone
he
call
won't.
that never comes.
Yeah, and like, so yeah, let's talk about like the main side quests. Like, what were your overall thoughts on those? So like the companion quests, the stuff with Johnny, I guess, although like you can argue that should have been main stuff, but it was technically side stuff. And then there's other ones like the Paralyses and Delamain. Like, what would you think of those?
I'm
overall?
personally fine with the idea that a big chunk of the stuff with Johnny was optional, because again, V doesn't have to engage with Johnny if he doesn't want to. If you want to be the kind of V that does everything he can to push Johnny back, push Johnny out, and just get his body back for himself, then it would make sense that he wouldn't try to make Johnny happy by reliving the concerts and finding the album and all of that stuff. So I had no issue with that being more optional.
It makes sense. I think the only problem is, since they so strongly push Johnny's story, if you miss all that, you're like, I can't even imagine like how much more empty the game feels if you just skip all that.
But when it comes to the rest of the characters, I feel like it was a little skewed in Panam's favor, very specifically, where her stuff felt very, I don't want to say thought out, but certainly richer than what you're doing with Judy.
Yeah.
Like, it's nice that you can help Judy try to fix whatever her name was.
Evelyn,
yeah. It's nice that you can kind of be there for her and try to help her out. I was a little miffed that no matter what you do, you fail. And then she just ends up leaving.
Yeah, I tried that mission like 100 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no salvaging it.
I settled with the killing them and letting the traitor go, and I was like, whatever. I tried killing her, then I tried like not killing anyone, and I was like, no matter what I do, it kind of sucks.
Yeah, exactly. It all ends the same, and thus kind of has the Mass Effect 3 problem of just like, well, your choices don't.
But that's the problem.
Really
that's the problem with all of the games where they claim that you have free choice. Is how do you rein in it to have one of a few endings?
Yeah,
you're always kind of stuck having to kind of narrow it back down. Mass Effect did it all the wrong ways, if you ask me. But Cyberpunk didn't do a very good job of it either. I don't feel like there was that much choice to begin with, which is why I struggle calling Cyberpunk a bit of an RPG.
Yeah, I think
the RP element of Cyberpunk is that you play V that RPs as Johnny Silverhand. That's about
basically, yeah. I think the only mission I felt like there was actual like wow, I'm kind of cool to do this again, was the Voodoo Boys one, where you decide if you like side with the Netwatch agent and then what you do inside and everything. But like, you know, The Witcher 3 had like a dozen of those. Cyberpunk had that. You know, like it's like what, and even then it was like, oh, there could have been more. Like there was, you know, so much more depth to like the equivalent stories in The Witcher 3, and more choice and consequence. And like, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of games that kind of don't live up to that promise, but not like on a necessarily huge scope. But The Witcher does have vastly different endings. Yeah.
It also doesn't let you. It doesn't let you really. The problem with The Witcher 3's endings is I feel like it's so like tense because you don't really know what. Like if you don't read up on it, you don't really know exactly what is going to dictate your ending.
Yeah.
And the difference is so goddamn dramatic.
Yeah.
That like one of my friends, she restarted the entire game because she was so mad when she saw the ending. She's like, "What?" And she's just like, did the whole game again. I was like, okay, I reloaded an earlier save before you met like Ciri.
It's about the principle.
Yeah, no, he's a different Geralt.
Yeah, exactly.
I can certainly understand the sentiment behind doing something like that. I just don't know that I would do it for something like Cyberpunk. even if there was such a thing as a better ending that I prefer, I don't think I would force myself through the game.
No, but that
being halfway through, I wouldn't stop and just restart because I know I missed out on that ending.
But if anything, that's a fucking comment on how good The Witcher is, that she was willing to like restart from the beginning to get the better ending, not just like quit in frustration. You know.
I'm
I would
trying to
never
think of a game that I did
Cyberpunk.
something like that, but
Well, I lost all
think
my
of
Dark
one.
Souls 2's characters once upon a time, and
I've lost all of my Dark Souls
yeah.
characters at some point or another.
So
Back when we
sorry,
were playing-
guys.
right? Back when we were on the 360.
it's like,
Yeah,
oh,
a
here,
good time.
download this DLC. Okay, the DLC is downloaded, but all your characters are gone. It's like,
I mean, just recently I had started to replay all of the Dark Souls, completing all of the bosses, and I was basically done with Dark Souls 3. I had 2 bosses left, and when I built the new PCs, I forgot to transfer my save, so I had to start over.
Yeah.
I don't mind. I love the Soul series is easily my favorite series.
Yeah, I'm
Bloodborne is
playing for free
definitely
again right now.
my quintessential game would be Bloodborne at this point.
Yeah.
But I don't know that something like Cyberpunk lends itself well to doing something like this.
no,
Both
no,
in
it
terms of
doesn't.
replayability factor, in terms of re-experiencing the story,
No.
but in replayability also in experiencing different ways to get to an end.
There
I
aren't
still have
enough
a hard time.
variety.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I still have a hard time justifying in a world where hacking and guns exist why some people still rely on melee. Like, just in the scope of the universe, I don't understand that swords are so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
They're cool.
Like, in hack your
Yeah,
game,
they're neat.
like, they are. I love
That's why-
swords. But would
That's the
you
only
really,
reason.
in a world where guns exist, like, would you really?
I
If you're on the right drugs, if you're the animals, I guess.
yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, obviously not. Like, and nowadays, even if you just go out in the streets, if there's like a gang war, you don't have like a bunch of people show up with pistols and the other guys show up with samurai swords.
Yeah,
If they did, holy shit.
Like, you bring a knife to a gunfight.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be a hell of a
still found-
power play.
Yeah, of course. I still found that like they made the. I know that it's just there because it's cool, and like they make them look really awesome. And I know that
Yeah.
I put a lot of points into blades in that game. So I was playing sometimes. There was a big chunk of Cyberpunk where I played as a stealth with knives and
Yes.
swords,
Yeah.
and if you put poison on them, the crits are nuts.
Oh.
You just like stab people once and they're all dead. Like it's like
Yeah.
the
Yeah, the
numbers that
head
would
just
pop up.
explodes.
Yeah, they were just dead. Basically, poke, and you go through an entire area. Even if they see you, you just sprint at them and just give them a little stab, and then everyone explodes. It's just
Mhm.
so they made it fun. Like I enjoyed playing with blades in that game, but if you're looking at it from like a realistic perspective, like why would you use a sword? They struggle too, and that's why you have those enemies who kind of go super quick
Mhm.
because they're like, well, otherwise you're just going to shoot them while they're running at you, and you'd be right to do that because
Yeah.
why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah. It's like it would be a mistake not to.
Exactly. What difficulty did everyone play on when they did the first time around?
Or
Not the
Hard?
hardest, but the one below it.
that one. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to have as vanilla an experience as I could and experience the experience of the masses, so I played on normal.
Okay.
I usually would. I just read a review that said it was a little too easy, so I tried
It
to.
was. It really was.
Yeah, it definitely was.
So my first playthrough, I went the hardest, and on my second playthrough, I went the easiest, just to like try
Oh, boy.
to get both
Go on.
spectrums of it. Yeah. So the hardest one, my first playthrough, I went a melee build, and like, holy hell, I'd have to punch people like a billion times, and I'd still be doing huge amounts of damage. But the problem with the difficulty that I noticed very quickly, it's not that it's a harder game. The AI is not smarter. There's not
It's
more
numbers.
enemies.
No,
They're just bigger bullet sponges.
Yeah.
So on my second playthrough, when I went on super easy, I decided to go like sneaky gunman, and like headshots felt good, and I actually kind of found myself enjoying the combat more, just when it was easy, because I felt like I was being rewarded for being the sneaky guy who went around, got the right angle, shot this dude in the head, snuck around again, as opposed to doing exactly that, getting up to the point where you shoot the guy in the head, and then he just takes the bullet, like, hey, there he is, and then you got to dump like 40 other sneak shots into his head.
That's a problem I had even back when Borderlands was fresh out, where it's like, it's fun to play an RPG that has some shooting elements, but it takes a lot of the fun of shooters out of the equation. Because,
Yes.
the headshots get you the crit damage or whatever,
Yeah.
but you still have to shoot the head like 15 times before the enemy drops, and it's just like, I don't
Yeah.
know that my suspension of disbelief can take that.
it's also just not. It's not satisfying. Even if you do, if you're just playing a game, like it's fine. It's just the satisfaction of getting a headshot, which is why towards the end of Cyberpunk, I thought I have to agree with Danny. I was having a lot of fun just getting headshots because they would just kill people and their heads would explode, as opposed to that the whole thing where you shoot them in the head and they're like, who's shooting at me? Like,
Yeah.
That's brutal. And some games really know how to handle guns, and for me, Borderlands makes it feel kind of bad. I think that Doom feels good. It feels chunky. Cyberpunk, Cyberpunk, when you're getting those crits, it feel good. But yeah, if you're playing the hardest difficulty,
that's why I use Comrade's Hammer all the time, because like fuck having to shoot people multiple
I
times.
think what made it more satisfying in something like Doom as opposed to something like Cyberpunk is that the weak spot in Doom wasn't always the obvious head. Some
That's
creatures had weak spots that you had to work for a little more, like shooting in the back or shooting the legs or shooting behind a shield. Or, like they made you work for that weak spot. Where Cyberpunk does absolutely nothing to get you to work for it. People are usually standing pretty dumbly in the middle of rooms and, oh, we're being shot at. The first reaction of the AI isn't to seek cover, it's just to find whoever's shooting.
Also, enemy variety is a little sparse here. Like, if you're thinking about The Witcher, which has all these different beasts, as opposed to, here there's no wildlife. It's basically robots. And even in robots, there's
just
like
a variety
of
of
robots to get to robots. And even in the humanoids, if you want to get really granular with it, you get people that shoot at you, people that try to melee you, and net runners. And you run into maybe 5 net runners over the course of the game.
Yeah. That's like 5 enemy types.
Yeah.
Like, it runs, drive fast, and all of them, you just blast them. Like, there's very little challenge there, a variety of challenge that you can achieve with that limited of an enemy set. It's like the first few levels of a AAA game would introduce that. Like, look at Doom, or even look at like a game like Bayonetta that has like such a huge array of enemies and like crazy varieties that you have to approach differently, learn their patterns. Here, it's like you learn the pattern in the intro. You're like, okay, guys react like this. Stealth works like this. Okay. And when you fight your first Netrunner, you're like, okay, I need to be careful for that. But that's the most variety you really see, which is kind of unfortunate. I think that's a big... Even the bosses, like Adam Smasher was like the only boss that I can really remember.
Right.
Yeah. I killed Smasher before he had even done like his intro speech. Yeah, because I just emptied a gun into his chest and he was dead.
Yep.
Yeah,
that was it. That's the boss of the game. So you have
who once again. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to go a bit off topic, so go ahead.
Okay. That was the boss of the game. Who once again, I as a player felt little to no connection to. Johnny, on the other hand, has a whole history with him. But V as a character, like
you see Smasher
never interact with him. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As
hiding behind some glass.
You see him when you do the heist, and that's it.
As Evelyn Parker.
In the BD, yeah.
But wait, what was I going to even say? Shit, sorry,
we were talking about how combat basically doesn't evolve just as the game goes. Like we were saying how
harder.
You learn the stuff.
And I guess I have a question about this actually, if y'all don't mind. What was your most recurrent cause of death? Was it your own carelessness?
Mines. Everywhere.
Mines. Honestly, if I have to really get down to it, the first time was just like, me being negligent, me being a fist fighting character who can't block bullets, which I think was a little bit of an oversight.
It makes sense.
At least,
how do you go about blocking a bullet if you don't have a riot shield?
Because if you have gorilla arms, your arms are made of some pretty hard materials, and they do give you a block option. I just wish that it would have at least reduced, like as a perk or something, reduce the amount of bullet damage you take when blocking. Because otherwise, my goal is basically like you have to sneak around and mess someone up, or like have the berserker cyber deck and just get rid of hacking entirely, and then just play it as a run up and click the button a whole bunch until you win simulator.
I didn't really die much. Like I can't say what killed me the most.
I guess like geometry killed me. Like I stepped on a bad piece of trash, and then like the car ran me over for the umpteenth time, basically.
I mean,
like
I guess I kind of shot myself in the foot with that one, because for me it was entirely on me every time. It was always combat was getting a little too easy, so I was getting reckless, and then oh wait, I got shot here, so I'm gonna take it a little slower next time, and it was fine.
Yeah, I don't feel like
Again, I wasn't playing this melee character that had a lot of body. Like my body was a 4 until the end of the game, kind of thing.
Right.
So I had no HP to work with. I had armor to save myself to no end because my crafting was maxed. My engineering was top. But in the end, if I got reckless with how I handled my body, because I was so used to having these out-of-body experiences when hacking, that when it got down to having to put my body somewhere where I was at arm's way, I would usually be a little too reckless and I would die for it.
Right.
But that was really it. There was no challenge that was like, okay, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this boss fight properly so that I don't die, because it was always just down to me having been too reckless, not taking cover or just...
I actually died quite a lot, especially in the beginning of the game, because I was on hard. I was trying to play as a shooter, and I wasn't getting those damage counters that I got at the end of the game. So at the beginning, like I had to like play perfectly, because if someone saw me and attacked me, I was pretty much going to die no matter what. And I have to agree with Danny a bit that like if as a sword user in the beginning I was using the sword more than guns. I kind of wish that I could at least block and deflect bullets, kind of like Jedi.
Kind of like a Jedi.
Yeah. With a sword, that would make sense. Like, maybe not with a fist, but with a sword, 100%. Yeah.
I just don't understand.
Getting shot in the face more than anything, especially if you have the gorilla gauntlets and stuff. But yeah, no, 100%. That could have been a nice little something.
That might have been fitted for like a end game or late game tier. Maybe not a cyberdeck upgrade, but one of those replacements for cyberdecks.
Yeah, just a legendary mod for your whatever you happen to have in your arm slot. You got the gorilla gloves. You get like titanium.
I don't know. I think that would be broken because you would get to keep your hacking, and there's a lot to be said about the choice of giving up something like hacking in favor of upgrading another one of your competence.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically, the way they have it in the end is you either have a legendary cyber deck if you intend on hacking, or a legendary mod if you intend on shooting. You get Sandavisten, which slows time, and then you get the other one, which just makes you crazy powerful for melee builds, the Berserk one.
I just use nothing. I fucked up. I had the deck, the hacking thing. The only reason is because I'm an achievement hunter, and I was trying to get the Christmas tree achievement. And I couldn't do it, no matter, because they would either die before I could upload enough demons, or it just didn't count the demons, or one would expire before I uploaded another one. And I was getting so frustrated. That's the only reason I hacked in the game, was trying to get that achievement, and I couldn't do it. It's rough.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I don't know if you guys are big achievement buffs, but there were a few that
I am not.
There were some brutal ones in this game that I kept trying to do, and I was like, "Fuck this!" Like the Berserker falling one. It's like kill 2 people with like a hero landing.
Oh
it ain't happening. Like lining up 2 people already who aren't running around because they're trying to get to you. Like you have to get like. I tried to lure people. I remember I was doing this one part. I was on an overpass and I was trying to hack a lure to make people come to one spot, turn on Berserk, jump off, and land on them. And I did it one time, and it just didn't do like any damage. So I guess I have to like stealth hit them, run away from battle, then run. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm like, I'm not doing this.
No, it's stupid. No, exactly.
It's not worth it. Yeah.
Because once again, the whole superhero thing was a really cool mechanic, but I feel like 9 times out of 10 it just wouldn't work. Because I would hit this weird, janky, diagonal piece of symmetry or geometry.
And then it would send you flying sideways.
Well, it would either launch me like 50 fucking miles into the ocean from the center of the city, or it would kill me because I landed on the geography wall, and the game thought that the acceleration from me slipping off that piece of diagonal geometry was enough to
count of how many times I faced through the floor because I walked on a pile of garbage.
Yeah,
propelled me forward and just flipped me through the ground.
Yeah, I changed my answer.
Garbage.
Anything.
No, yeah. I suffered a few garbage deaths.
Yeah. Like, what the hell?
Like literal garbage deaths.
Yeah.
I remember being on a motorcycle and going really quickly, and the game was struggling to load as fast as I was going, and I had to take a turn to go into a garage, an underground garage for one of the missions, and I went so quickly from the street to the garage that the concrete hadn't loaded, and I just phased right through.
Ha ha! Beautiful.
Yeah.
You got to play with that in mind. That's one of the enemies you basically have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So,
The world wants you dead.
Night
The
City
game is
is
your
the
enemy.
villain.
Seriously, I did have to be careful a few times. I remember did a mission where you had to return a car to
One of
to
the
one of your,
Delamains?
no, not the Delamain one. It was just some other contract where I had to return a car somewhere, like get a car, steal it, bring it back. So
Okay.
I did that, and was driving really fast, and I drove into the garage that you need to bring it back to too quickly, and I didn't. I guess I kind of missed the spot where it triggers the end of the mission, so I couldn't leave the car, and I couldn't end the mission.
Oh,
I was just like, okay, I should have seen this coming. I should have been more careful. Because I was always more careful when I'd bring a car back in a mission, even the Delamain ones. I'd be like, if I had to drive the car, I would drive very carefully because I'm like, it just takes one thing going wrong for like this mission to get like fucked up.
yeah.
And the driving was already so sketchy to begin with.
Especially in some of the garbage areas in the Badlands. Like if you're driving,
Oh,
yeah.
my
God. Oh, I hated that. I hated that place entirely. The one redeeming factor of that area was Alana Pierce cameo. That was pretty nice.
Yes. Yeah.
Wait, where was she?
So she's in the garbage area. So I don't know if other starts can get this, but as a
No, I think
nomad,
you have to be nomad.
you have to be nomad. Okay, so as a nomad, you start the game. You have a piece of crap car, which you end up trashing pretty early. Like once you start doing the other stuff. And then Alana Pierce is an NPC who you'll find in the Badlands in the garbage area, and she has somehow managed to find your car, and she's working on it. And you could either like steal it back from her, you can pay her for it, you can let her keep it and whatnot. And it was a nice little side nod. And one
cool.
of the few
That's
there's actually a few cameos, like Hideo Kojima's like right there at the start, which was beautiful.
I mean, there's a bunch really. If you get down to it, there's a lot of personalities that were used as either like as face imprints just to model some of the NPCs, or just straight up there.
Like Grimes? Like Grimes is just in the game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Grimes.
Hey, what's going on? How's your kid? XE what how do you
He's straight out of
pronounce that?
Cyberpunk. The kid is a character. He's the boss of the game.
Yeah, basically.
He's Adam Smasher. But yeah, like my favorite cameo was finding the Death Stranding baby. I was like, wow,
yeah.
they just put that there. Like, and like you comment on it, you're like, what is this thing? Just a baby.
Baby in a jar.
And Gladys also was pretty cool.
Gladys
I have to
was-
say.
Yeah.
That was a nice. And I feel like that's why we're so, half the reason that we're doing the podcast on this game in particular is that it had so much there. There was so much potential.
It's all very superficial.
That's the end product 100%. But when you look at what could have been, if they were given another year or two and maybe didn't hype it up so much and maybe set a more realistic expectation for what they as a company who has never made a game like this can do, I would have been happier, I think. But once again, this is the world of fucking hindsight is 2020.
I mean, we live in hype cancel culture. So if you don't hype your stuff, people don't buy it. And if people don't like what you did, they're going to cancel you.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of the reaction that we're seeing for Cyberpunk that's completely disproportionate. People cheering at the fact that they were hacked and like
Oh,
them
yeah.
Oh, no,
with some of
that's
their
obviously
clips.
not okay.
Like that's fucked. That's twisted. That's wrong in so many levels. You have the right to be disappointed. That doesn't mean you have to be mean about it or be evil about it.
No, for sure.
No, never.
But,
And let's be real, this isn't a company like EA either, who frankly would deserve something like that. Cyberpunk, CD Projekt Red is still giving refunds and allowing people to keep playing their game.
Yeah.
This is a company who clearly cares about their customer base. It just so happened that crunch and frankly shitty producers
the thing
certainly
about
damaged this game. It's just a matter
the thing
of
about a
basic-
studio like CDPR is that the people who work on the games specifically are probably very much behind the gamers and saying we got to do something that's right and that's going to be good for them. And then you got the management of the company as a company that sees the game as nothing more than another product. And they're going to push and be like, well, we got investors that are waiting to bank on this game. Are you guys done yet?
Mhm.
And they are going to put insane amounts of pressure, insane amounts of unnecessary pressure to get something out it's essentially, it's art. You can't rush art.
Yeah.
It happens or it doesn't. And in this case, they rushed it and the feeling went away. they dropped the ball.
Yeah, well, I mean, a big part of that too is just how much they hyped it up as well. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Oh yeah.
They weren't saying, "Hey, we're just gonna make like The Witcher 3 with a Cyberpunk skin." It's like, no. We're gonna change
We're reinventing
the world.
yeah.
And like
It's gonna be breathtaking.
yeah,
Exactly.
and and like you have those things, and then even the little things, like how at first they were like, "It's gonna come when it's ready." Well, guess what? It wasn't.
Well,
fucking
it
ready.
wasn't done and it wasn't ready.
They betrayed the very first promise the game made, because that was there in that first teaser after it plays, it coming when it's ready, and they stayed with that until the first release date, and then it just wasn't ready.
It fell apart from there. Have you guys seen the Crobe Cat? Do you guys watch Crobe Cat on YouTube?
Nope.
I don't think so.
So he's what he does is he doesn't upload often, but basically his videos is he doesn't speak at all. He just edits like public videos together to make a criticism on something, and usually video game related. So usually like things like Cyberpunk, or like if something goes wrong, like the criticism is visible in itself. Like he doesn't have to say a single word; he just shows it to you, and it's obvious. So he'll show, let's say, like someone saying like, "Yeah, it'll be out when it's ready," and then as that person's talking, there'll be like a video of things going wrong, or like it'll be like contrasting what promises were made with what went wrong. I'd recommend checking it out. It's a long video. You don't obviously have to watch the whole thing, but just watching his different videos on E3 or on everything in the game industry are really they're entertaining, but they kind of help you see through a lot of the promises and the marketing bullshit that you might see too much in the industry, and it's kind of amusing. So yeah, I'd recommend that.
And I mean, it's not the first time that we hear of a game where the marketing kind of went wrong. If I remember correctly, when Destiny, the first one, came out,
Ooh.
the budget for that game was absolutely out of this world.
Yeah.
But when the game released, the consensus, or what everybody seemed to agree on, is that, yeah, it's the best 7 out of 10 you'll ever play.
Yeah,
But it's still it's 7 out of 10 is nothing amazing. And it's definitely not what the marketing for Destiny was pitching. It was Destiny a good game? Yeah, good enough, I guess.
That too. They went for that, revolutionary hype train.
The budget for
Just
it was
like
like
No Man's
$500
Sky.
million. Like, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And
I
like
guess at least in that
was
sense,
marketing.
yeah. And I think it, I mean, obviously it paid off enough that they made another one, and that one's done well enough. But yeah, it's upsetting when it doesn't live up to the hype, but also you can't. I mean, but I think the worst part with Cyberpunk is like, okay, yeah, if you thought it was going to be like the greatest thing ever, okay, like some of that's on you. Nothing's going to be the greatest thing ever. That's just impossible. But even for people who like may have had like somewhat reserved expectations, it's like it's still like, wow, it didn't.
I found an interesting list of the most expensive video games to develop, and at the top of this list, far above its closest pursuant, is Cyberpunk.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I had no idea.
Yeah. Cyberpunk, then Star Citizen, then Grand Theft Auto 5, then COD Modern Warfare 2.
It still has a chance to surpass it. Like Star Citizen could still
Yeah, but
become
it's
the
not
most
done,
expensive.
yeah.
Yeah, they can still keep doing.
It's
they could
$10
keep
million
going.
behind as it is now.
Yeah.
And quite ironically, Jacob, you'll be happy to hear, in 2011, The Old Republic is like 5th on that list.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
the Old Republic was
probably
huge
the
when
reason it
launched.
worked. It's probably the reason it worked so well. They put the money behind it.
The marketing was awesome. I love the
Yeah.
trailers for that.
Yeah,
that
like
game.
when the first month of the Old Republic was the best month any MMO ever had. Like it's including WoW.
Yeah.
It just fell off very
And I
quickly
keep
after.
going down that list, and I'm finding more and more gems in there. Are you guys familiar with what Genshin Impact is?
Yes,
It's a mobile game that made top 10.
but it's not just mobile. It's on everything. It's like
Yeah.
it runs on. It's like PUBG or Fortnite. It's just like
it's
it's
a
a
bit
game
more
that,
mainstream
Everything.
than
PC,
that.
PS4, Android, iOS, name it, it's there.
Can't believe that stuff's
And it's
on
free.
mobile.
It's free. Microtransaction, baby. That's where the money's at now. That's why games like Valhalla have this super, super aggressive microtransaction.
because it's there. It's like you can't stagnate as a company. I hate this because that's just like a capitalism thing, a product of capitalism, that you kind of have to keep making more money. And you're like, well, if we just keep making games that are really expensive and more expensive, we need ways of making more money too. What makes sense to make more money? DLC, fine. What else makes money? Microtransactions.
Yeah. DLC is the early 2000s method of making more money with an old game. I say
Exactly.
DLC, but like I mean like CD-ROM expansion pack
Yeah,
for Diablo.
actual
Lord of
expansion
Destruction,
packs, yeah.
Or
Yeah,
even
we
gotta
like
buy this
expansion
big
packs to
one.
DLCs to this, microtransaction.
Microtransaction.
I hate it, but I also like I know why it's there, and it's like I can't solve that problem.
I can't.
I think-
Well, there's a point to it. If people are buying into it, that must mean that there's a public for it, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I just think
exactly.
they need to. And I mean, I guess that can be another question of: is it time for AAA studios to start toning down the costs of production in favor of producing more, maybe slightly downgraded games? And I say downgraded very, like, not necessarily as a flaw in the game. I love my indie games and my old pixel graphics just as much as the next guy. But maybe for the AAA scene to start adapting to the fact that maybe we don't need these super big hundreds of hours with realism graphic level.
I
Is
think
there an argument in favor of this?
I think that the risk is too high because I think people want to see technology pushed. People buy PS5s because they want to see better, more realistic graphics. It's what gets more people to buy the new tech. They want to see the new tech being pushed. The thing I see, and I was just reading about this in one of my books on games development, is that I think we're reaching a boiling point in terms of how you fund games. Because right now, you buy, like most of people, I guess, are going to buy a game. I love buying games for my collection. You buy it for like $80. Now they're going to have a price hike.
Yeah, they're talking about hiking up.
So that's starting to beg a question here. It's like we need to find a new model of development, developing games that's going to be more sustainable, like Xbox Game Pass. Is that really what we need to do? Do we need to start making games a subscription service like Netflix? Is that an easier way to raise money for development costs and then also have people have access to more games? Because that's the funding would be taken care of in a different way. Because right now, if we just keep boosting game costs by $10 every generation, it's going to end up getting kind of crazy.
Yeah, you're going to reach a point where people aren't going to be willing to buy the games at full price just because I don't think, especially if games like Cyberpunk are published at upped prices and then fail to satisfy the need that they were looking to fill, like people aren't going to justify spending $100 on a game that was meh.
Yeah.
See what I mean? Like,
So-
they'll do it once or twice. They'll do it if they know the game is good or if it's a franchise that's very dear to them. But if they keep getting these disappointments and keep feeling like this game wasn't worth what I paid for, kind of thing, it's going to become a real problem for the industry if they reach that breaking point of games not being worth what we pay for them.
100%.
On the flip side of that, though, I feel like the problem with kind of like the Xbox Game Pass and whatnot, for developers, it's incentivized, or there's a lack of incentive at that point. If everyone's like, let's say that is, let's use Xbox Game Pass as an example. It's like $10 a month. You can play all these games, no problem. And yeah, all those companies, all the individual game developers and whatnot, they are getting, I suppose, maybe a bit more consistent funding, right? Because it's coming every single month and they're getting their portion of it and whatnot. But what's incentivizing them to make a great game, something that would kind of stand above the rest?
Well, what would incentivize them is in a context like the Xbox Game Pass. I would imagine that the studio gets its share of the revenue only if people play the game, because you can't have something like Xbox have the Game Pass and push only the Xbox Studio games.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have third developers, and for the third developers to get their share of the cake, they have to push something that the players actually play. And
There's probably an initial payout as well.
There probably is.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm sure the initial company gets a pretty, especially from companies like Microsoft.
They still have the incentive of making a good game. Where I have an issue with the whole like Game Pass model is that the developers of these platforms, like Google with Stadia, Xbox with its Game Pass, and all of that stuff, then get to serve their own agenda and say, we want to push those games because these games resembles the games we make, and we want our platform to sell our games first, or to make our games more accessible first. Whereas something like Steam is more, if your game's popular, it's going to reach front page. If you can sell a bunch of your game, it's going to reach front page.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, at the end of the day, it comes down to the production cost of the AAA games, and like even on Steam, even though you're not even getting a physical box, and they used to be cheaper. I remember on Steam.
Yeah, no,
too.
now
Like,
you
they used to
still
be
pay
able-
the full price.
Yeah.
You're paying like
Yeah.
$80 and tax too. I remember also not having to pay tax. Like
Yeah.
it's just
Once
it's starting
upon a
to get
time.
expensive. It's starting to get really, really expensive, and like you almost need to wait for sales if you want to get like.
Most of the
Reasonably
games
priced.
You
I
gotta
bought
pick and
in the past
choose what you
decade
get.
were on
exactly.
sale or used games.
For the most part, yeah. You got a couple exceptions every year, and then the rest, like, you just wait.
Put on the wish list and wait, hoping for the best. I'm
Yep.
looking at you, Final Fantasy 14.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah. That's why it's great. Right now, I'm playing a game that has no money, but I will put money into it soon, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, it's definitely gonna be interesting to see how things go, because I mean they're probably gonna up the price at some point.
They have to. They've got to that point where producing something, and that's an interesting way to circle back to the whole pushing the machine kind of thing, where if you want to get the most out of those expensive machines, then you got to have these expensive productions. But if the cost of selling and buying those productions don't necessarily make it worth the while of the public that you're aiming for, then you're kind of at an impasse of how can I make something expensive cheap or affordable.
Yeah.
Microtransactions.
Yeah, that's a way to
Live
do
service
it. That's a way to
gameplay.
do it.
Yeah.
Or the way PlayStation and Xbox have done it for a while, where it's like if you want access to the online features, or for the Switch, full access to the online features, you've got to have the monthly subscription to the online subscription service, so it alleviates some of the costs of running servers and all of that.
Well, I mean, in Nintendo's case, I feel like they have a much worse excuse, since I don't think they're used to running online infrastructure, and it tends to be wonky, to put it lightly.
It
Like
is
just,
very
yeah.
much
just to
so.
give you an example, though, of how that could work in your favor, I went on a family pass, which obviously makes it cheaper for you and your friends to join up, and something happened. I don't know what, but for years, for let's say 2 years now, none of us are paying for it, and none of our credit cards are being charged. We get free. Yeah, I don't know. It's only I used to pay for PlayStation Online. I stopped because I was like, I don't play enough online, and I wouldn't pay for Nintendo, even though it is really cheap. I was just like, I'll try it out once.
Yeah.
But we're all like saying like, did you check your credit card? And we're like, no, I'm not being charged. I'm like, are you getting charged? None of us are. We're like, well, okay, and I still have it.
Guess we'll
It's
keep.
been 2 years.
Yeah,
our
I
little
wish I could
secret.
say the same. I've been paying my Nintendo subscription very monthly.
Actually, it's funny you bring up Nintendo. There was an article recently how they're finally updating their servers. As it turns out, they've been using the same servers for the last 20 years.
Yeah, that's fine.
So basically,
Nintendo-
running on Windows 98, which is why anytime
the
you try to
airport
jump on
still
your
runs
Switch,
on
it's
Windows.
so
A
janky.
lot of key systems at the airport still run on Windows 95.
That's
Jesus
crazy.
Christ.
Because you can say what you want about the technology being dated. The thing about dated technology is that we usually know it inside out. The list of known bugs for Windows 95 is basically extensive and whole inclusive. If you know these things and avoid them, you will never have issues. And Nintendo is probably one of the developers, both in terms of making consoles and in terms of making games, that prove that there is some weight to the idea of toning things down, stopping that push for always better, always faster, and making something that's more about the experience, the affordability, and the reach of it in terms of public, in terms of wallet space, if you will.
Yeah.
And Nintendo is
argue
a
that.
great figure in terms of that. But if all the players starting adopting that philosophy, I don't think it would work as well.
No, I don't think they can pull it off. And I think that what's interesting is that like Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, which are essentially the bigger players, and PC, which has its own thing going on, they all bring like a strange uniqueness to the table that's pulling the industry in a different direction. And Sony is all about exclusives and unique cinematic games. Nintendo is all about
Family
innovating.
friendliness.
Yeah, it's about innovating fun, and yeah, their games are
Yeah.
family friendly. That's a cornerstone. But like, they also just they try to do new things and they fail a lot, but they also
But
succeed
they
a lot.
try.
Yeah, they're
The simple fact that
messing
they have
with
the
stuff.
guts to try.
That's it. And Microsoft for a while wasn't doing anything crazy, but now the Game Pass is probably their biggest, boldest move. And I don't
and
personally
now
wanna
that they
use
bought
but
they bought Bethesda, they
Yes.
just opened a big door there
for
into
their own
the whole
exclusives.
into the whole RPG fantasy thing.
Yeah, I think that for exclusives they stand a good chance, and especially if they combine that with the use of their game streaming service, they could pull the industry in a different direction. And
They
yeah, I
already
know,
pretty much reign supreme in terms of the game streaming service because Stadia is slowly pulling the plug on everything.
yeah, that sucked because I was actually trying to get a job at Stadia. And
I
they're
mean,
like,
the
okay.
studio's still going to be open. The Stadia studio is still going to be open in Montreal, but they're probably going to change the designation and the goal mission, I suppose.
I don't think they're developing any games there right now.
No, they're not developing in house. It's more.
Which is, yeah.
I think they're adapting mostly just to help stabilize the infrastructure.
Yeah, I think so. Which is a shame, I guess. Well, but again,
Yeah,
that's
if
also
you're not
just,
a coder, it's definitely a shame.
yeah. At this point, but they got replaced by Quantic Dream, which is what we have here. And we're getting a bit off topic from Cyberpunk at this
Very
point,
much
but yeah.
so.
Yeah, it's definitely got off the rails a bit. Also, before we go much further, we should try to wrap it up soon because it is 5:00.
Yeah, Louis got
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and things. So,
And not gonna lie, I had to take a piss break like 50 minutes ago, but I can keep going. Don't worry.
all right,
That's
we
a
can
strong
we can
bladder.
try to wrap
Dude,
up.
I have a very unfortunate bladder story if we ever get down to it, but
We'll have a bladder
I-
cast one day.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us your worst bladder and bowel stories.
oh
So-
man.
So here, before we wrap up part one, do you want to send us out on a good final question or like a good final?
Well, I got a couple of questions we could do.
Want to do some rapid fires.
Well,
Yeah, let's try to do some rapid fire.
yeah. Well, I only got two, but like they could be probably one of them could be pretty quick. So the first question I had, like where would you guys rank Cyberpunk amongst the games you played like in the last year, and just overall, like how like where does it stand in your
Hold on.
list of games, and or how good do you think it is? If you want to give it like a number rating, or just like it's good, or it's great, or it's shit.
You're putting a tough one on me. I have to remember what I've played in the last year. Hold on.
Let me just open up Steam real quick. and see
Yeah,
if I
well,
I want to see what's installed. That's going to be my big telltale of what
well,
I've played in the last year.
I'll go first then because I have pretty good memory. Like my favorite game I played this year, I already know the answer. It's easy. It's Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah, I heard only good things about that.
That's my game of the year. Easy peasy for me. As for how I feel about Cyberpunk overall, I'd give it like a 7.5 out of 10 if I were to do a number thing. Just because there is a lot of good there, but so much of it is half measures or not quite living up to what it was supposed to be, or just not quite working. And I think like it maybe could be an 8.5 if they really fixed a lot of stuff, but I don't think it could have possibly been anything more based off what it was in the end.
Yeah, I think I stand pretty close to you since I don't think it's like the best game I played in the last year. I think it's good. I think I like there are moments. There were some moments that when I was playing that game that felt really good and really interesting and thought provoking. And I have to say I think the Arasaka ending in particular, just saying that moment, those moments in the Arasaka ending really felt powerful and felt like some of the best moments of the game for me. I still think, and I know I'm not going to get into this with you, Jacob, but I still think that Last of Us 2 is probably a better experience for me overall. I still think I had more of an emotional roller
This is
coaster than
a 3-man podcast from this day forward.
that. I got it in. That's all that matters.
No. You'll get it in, and
Drop the mic and leave, please.
even if it's just you and me, or if we find some other people, we will have a Last of Us cast.
Oh, I'm down. I would like to be involved in that.
I feel like that's going to quickly turn to the shaming of me, but at the same
No,
time,
not the shaming of you, just your decision to enjoy something that's hot garbage. No, I'll be civil. I'll be civil most of the time.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead, Louis.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that my ultimate final statement on Cyberpunk is that it is a good game. I will remember it. It doesn't come close to breaching like my list of like my all-time favorites. It's like it's nowhere close, but it's an experience I will remember and I do like. It's just not something I would bring up in a conversation about my favorite game.
Yeah,
that's a fair point. I've got a bit of a strange view on the last year of gaming because I feel like the games that I played were mostly half games. For example, one of them is Baldur's Gate 3, which I enjoyed quite a bit. I've gone.
But the game is not out yet, or wasn't out by the time you played.
It's chapter 1 of.
Yeah. It's
Probably
hard. It's a half of the game. Cyberpunk, I kind of feel is a bit of a similar situation because even though I did go through it a couple times, I'd say that
to release the main story.
More or less, yeah. I'm still waiting for more conclusive evidence and whatnot of what actually happened in the game. Because none of the endings they don't feel like a proper game ending. It doesn't feel like you fought for anything.
They feel like a DLC ending.
Yeah. So if I had to throw a number on Cyberpunk, I'd just be a flat 7. Because it is a good game. Especially in like early near the beginning, because I feel like they do kind of tailor it to be a bit of a nomad story as well, like Nomad Street Kid. So, Corpo is definitely just they threw that in at the last second or something. But yeah, I certainly enjoyed it at the start. It was only like really halfway through, maybe 60% through, that I really started noticing some of the flaws. And then on my second playthrough, I couldn't enjoy it like basically whatsoever. My game of the year is going to be Kenshi. Just because.
Yeah, I've never even played that.
Did that even come out this year?
No. Well, technically, yes. Well, ish.
It was in beta forever.
It was in beta for like 10 years, and then, they like had an official release. I think it was actually earlier last year in 2019. So that doesn't quite apply. Yeah. But
actually, I think I have a pretty similar opinion to yours, but not quite. Looking at my past year of gaming, it was a lot of indie titles. I had been very disinterested in the AAA scene. So if I was to pick one game of the previous ones I've played, like for the last year, Hades would probably take the winner as being my favorite game. Just even though it was a roguelike, it was probably the best roguelike ever. The characters are insanely rich, and there's just so much to love about that game. But if I was to rate Cyberpunk based on my last year of gaming, I would give it 6, maybe 7. Because, like Julian mentioned, there was a lot of moments that felt quite powerful, but overall, these moments stood out as being like very rare and few apart. And I don't know that I can boost up the score of the game solely on 3 or 4 character interactions on something that took me like 80 hours to get through. Like, I don't know. So for me, it's a warm 6, a cold 7.
Yeah, there weren't enough, if any, wow moments. And like Julian, you'll know what I mean by this, but there was definitely no Bloody Baron moment.
I was trying to find that myself, and for me, it was like the closest I can even compare is I liked River's storyline a bit, and I was like, oh, maybe that's my Bloody Baron, but not even.
It's night and day. Yeah. So I think everybody went. Everybody said their.
I think so.
All right. So I have one other question. What are your expectations and hopes for the future of the game and or the franchise overall? Like, what do you want it to be like in a year from now, and just in general, what do you hope comes of Cyberpunk?
Yeah, I would like to see. I mean, there's the obvious answer, which is bug fixes. I don't think it's ever going to be great on the previous generation of consoles. I don't think it really needs to be, frankly. Especially in today's day and age, I feel like there are enough people switching to PC gaming. So ultimately, I have my own thoughts on consoles in general, and I don't think
subject for another day because I also have very controversial opinions.
Yeah. As for what else I would like to see, I mean, maybe just it kind of sounds weird to say, but a bit more world building. For all that they showed us, there was so much more that they didn't show us because of all these doors that some of them could be open, some of them could not. Some needed tech, some needed power, and others just led to nowhere. Like, give me a little bit more. I'd like to see more NPCs fleshed out. I'd like to see more, just some quality of life stuff. My literal first complaint about the game was the lack of like post character creation cosmetics. You know, like this is the world where people can get their arms replaced with titanium. The Maelstrom people, like with their head augmentations and whatnot. I would have loved, Borg fuckers, basically. I would have loved to have seen that be an option for V. And maybe people reacting differently to the person that you're playing. Do I think I'm going to see this in the next year? I mean, they'd have to rewrite the whole story, so I don't see that coming in particular. I would just hope that there's some more polished content coming in the future. I have faith in them. Like, they have the capacity to make a good game, and now that all of the world's attention, or at least all of the gaming community's attention, is on them, a la Fallout 76 style, I hope that they go an opposite direction from Bethesda and try to distance themselves from that bad press by releasing good, polished content, as opposed to doing the Bethesda method of, pay me $100 for a year and we'll give you some of the things that we promised in the initial announcement of the game.
Yeah.
So yeah.
For Cyberpunk, I think what I want to see for the game as it is bug fixes, because I don't think there is such a thing as salvaging that game anymore. It's too late. I don't think they can afford to rewrite the whole campaign and the whole game and the whole mechanical aspect of it. So I just want to see it get its bugs fixed to show that the studio knows how to code. I want to see a good DLC, not necessarily something breathtaking or anything out of the box thinking, just something nice that shows that the studios learned from the criticism that it got regarding Cyberpunk. And then I want to see them working on a follow through or follow up story that happens somewhere else in another game and actually take their time developing something that's going to be good. That's all I want. Because I don't think there is anything like fixing Cyberpunk at this point.
I don't think so either. I think that fixing it isn't the right word. I think that if I was as optimistic and realistic as possible, what I want to see happen in the next year is for, obviously, like you guys said, bug fixes, sure. I don't think that would be enough to pull me into the game, but add in a few of the things that they were talking about, like maybe have like a barbershop or a surgery place so you can change your character customization on the fly. Have a few of those little nice features thrown in, with maybe a few small interesting quest lines, and then drop a cool-ass expansion pack, much like Hearts of Stone, Blood and Wine, that really flesh out the world, introduce interesting characters, stuff that really just adds to the entire credibility of the world and the lore to it. And then when I come back and I have better performance from the bug fixes, some of the new additions of the small little things they've added in, maybe new places to buy, and then a good story to play in an expansion pack, then I think I would be satisfied with Cyberpunk 2077 as a package. I think it will have accomplished all it can at this point. I think that for the future of this, of CDPR, CDPR is going to do, I don't know if I would want a follow-up to Cyberpunk 2077. I'd almost want to see them try something different. I wouldn't be mad with if they made Cyberpunk 2078 and did a whole just a huge new idea. Because maybe they would learn from their mistakes and make something truly amazing. But I'd be more curious to see them not be locked down to an IP and really just try to make sure they'll probably make another Witcher game, but make something completely different too would be kind of nice. That's my end statement.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. But I feel like this game needs I think for the free DLC, we should get stuff like the barbershop, and that's where the quality of life stuff should come in. But for me, for this game to have any hope of having any sort of long-lasting impact, is it needs to hit home runs with its DLCs. It perhaps bring back some of the features that were
promised,
left out,
not delivered,
and provide them in a more contained but still there in the DLCs. And if one of them tells its own story that can maybe reach the highs of some of the quests in The Witcher, something can be salvaged of it. Like Julian, basically take the story of the first DLC in The Witcher with the world of the second DLC, and that's what I think I need to see from them to kind of salvage the game as is in any realistic way. Because the big problems there would be too difficult to it would be a new game if they tackled them, which is probably not realistic to expect from a game like this. But that's why I think I would be excited for a 2078, especially if they ditched Silverhand and just fully embrace the being in Night City doing you, and like take the foundations that they had here and then spend a couple years filling out all the juicy bits and then really having the proper experience.
Do you feel like Johnny Silverhand was detrimental to the success of the game?
Yes.
The way he was presented, yes.
You don't play as V, you play as Johnny.
Yeah. If you were Johnny to be through and through, like maybe the game should have been like, it starts as Johnny wakes up in V's body, and V's already dead. You're just taking over his body, you know?
Yeah.
That would make a lot more sense already.
Yeah, and you could still, still have to interact with V's people and stuff, and traverse the world in his body, but you are Johnny Silverhand from the beginning, and then
you get to learn more and more about who V was through some of the little tidbits of text that you find, and through some of the interactions with the people that used to know V.
Yeah, and they can make him that canon street kid, rags to riches story. Flesh it out, and you just unlock it as you go, and then take his body in new directions.
The story would also be deeply affected, since then you take away the urgency of V trying to save his life. Like, because then Johnny already has it. There would need to be an entirely new plot also.
Yeah, well, maybe just at least at the base level, just wanting to continue his work against Arasaka. Probably still wants to find and kill. I can't remember the guy.
Adam Smasher.
Yes, him, but also the top guy.
Guro.
Yeah. But I'm sure you could tie in like that, and then you could do more with the story, get more into the corporate stuff, because other things that got dropped. If you remember in the Corpo intro, there's like mention of an incident in like Europe or something.
Yeah.
And like I was like, okay, what is this? And you never know.
There was like some military fallout somewhere,
and like when you go to see your boss,
we were involved, and
he like microwaves the heads of a bunch of people, the head of some organization, never brought up again. I'm like, where is that? Like, why is there no Militech in this game? Like, Milit's like this huge, significant company and rival to Osaka, and there's no interaction with them whatsoever, except for possibly on the quest with the Maelstrom guys.
Yeah, the briefest of experiences with the lady there, and then I don't know about you guys, I never saw her again.
Oh, you're not
to
supposed
shit though
to.
for me.
What's up?
I think I read that you could romance her. I don't know if that was true or not.
One night stand.
You can bang her.
You gotta pay the Maelstrom with the corrupted ship without removing the bug, and then you can, as a side reward for the quest, bang her in a cheap motel.
Jeez, that's so different than what I experienced. My God, is that weird?
Right? My God.
I protected Maelstrom. It's funny because I didn't mean to. When I was at that mission, this not go on a huge tangent. I accidentally picked the choice that I made you shoot them, and I didn't want that. And I died, and I reloaded it, and then I saved them, and it was like a pretty big change there. That was what I thought the whole game was going to be like with all those changes.
Yeah,
choice matter, kind of thing,
But they really don't.
No.
That was a precursor of what could have. Like, I feel like they designed the first 3 hours of the game first, and like, okay, we'll build a whole concept on this,
and then they ran out of time, and
they ran out of time, ran out of budget, I guess, or just hyped it too hard. Because once again,
they ran out of inspiration at some point. The game stops feeling inspired somewhere in the middle. You feel like you're going through the motion more than you're building anything meaningful, and then it picks up again at the end.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to part 1 of this Cyberpunk discussion, or just this podcast.
Part 1 of the podcast. I think we did enough. We got 3 hours of Cyberpunk talk here, so I think okay.
And I feel like there's much more to be said still.
There could be.
Oh. Well, tell you what, we'll come back to Cyberpunk at least in a couple months when there's hopefully some more content.
When there's something new to talk about,
Yeah.
But
whether it's the DLC or.
Let me just stop my recording finally. Stop and save.